Okay. Hello. 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 Good morning. Good evening. Good afternoon. Yeah. Okay. By the way, when it comes to like Machiavelli, there is like a freaking video about it that I've watched. No, it's taken down. Wait, where is it? Yeah, we're gonna go Dostoevsky after this one, but for now it's like Machiavelli. For now it's like this one, and then yeah. Go there. Okay, here's the plan. We're going like Machiavelli, Dostoevsky. We're gonna like probably got a bunch of Young. Uh, what else could we like Kant, Kafka, some crazy things like that. Yeah, those are those are crazy, insane kind of books that we're gonna read. But I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if this one goes well or like doesn't go well. But before we start this thing, I want everybody to go to the link that I'm gonna put on chat. I'm gonna pin it. I'm gonna pin it so that everybody would understand that the reading of this thing is like based on the video. Okay. I won't like. I am not about whatever it is that other thinks, like the popular or the majority thinks of what Machiavellian thinking is, or what Machiavelli was like trying to do in this freaking book. It's not about that. And yeah, the link in the freaking thing, like trying to explain this and all, they explained it better than I could. And yeah, I'm just gonna link it to you guys, okay? Just gonna pin it so that you guys see it, and then I'm going to start reading because I haven't read this book yet, and I don't know where to start. Should we like read the note translation? But probably not. Let's just go right into it. This is like, how many pages is this one? Like 100? This is quite a short read, actually. Okay, dedicatory letter. Niccolò Machiavelli to the magnificent Lorenzo de' Medici. It is customary most of the time for those who desire to acquire favor with the prince to come meet him with things as they care most for among their own, or with things that they see please him most. Thus, one sees them many times being presented with horses, arms, cloth of gold, precious stones, and similar ornaments worthy of their greatness. Thus, since I desire to offer myself to your magnificence with some testimony of homage to you, I have found nothing in my belongings that I care so much for and esteem so greatly as the knowledge of the actions of great men, learned by me from long experience with modern things and the continuous reading of ancient ones. Having thought out and examined these things with great diligence for a long time, and now reduced them to one small volume, I send it to your magnificence. And although I judge this work undeserving of your presence, yet I have much confidence that through your humanity it may be accepted, considering that no greater gift could be made by me than to give you the capacity to be able to understand in a very short time all that I have learned and understood in so many years with so many hardships and dangers for myself. I have not ornamented this work, nor filled it with fulsome phrases, nor with pompous and magnificent words, nor with any blandishment or superfluous ornament whatever, with which it is customary for many to describe and adorn their things. For I wanted it either not to be honored for anything or to please solely for the variety of the matter and the gravity of the subject. Nor do I want to be reputed presumption if a man from a low and mean state dares to discuss and give rules for the government of princes. For just as those who sketch landscape place themselves down in the plain to consider the nature of mountains, and high places to consider the nature of low places, place themselves high atop mountains. Similarly, to know well the nature of peoples, one needs to be prince. And to know well the nature of princes, one needs to be of the people. Therefore, your magnificence, Take this small gift in the spirit in which I send it. If your magnificence considers and reads it diligently, you will learn from it my extreme desire that you arrive at the greatness that fortune and your other qualities promise you. And if your magnificence will at some time turn your eyes from the summit of your height to those low places, you will learn how undeservingly I endure a great and continuous malignity of fortune. Malignity? Oh. Man, so many fancy words. I don't think I'm gonna be able to like read this out loud for you guys, but I'm gonna try my best. Okay. Of principalities, how many are the kinds of principalities and in what modes they are required? All states and dominions that have held and do hold empire over men have been and are either republics or principalities. The principalities are either hereditary, in which the bloodline of their lord has been their prince for a long time, and they are new. The new ones, let me just bigger words. The new ones are either altogether new, as was Milan's Francesco Sforza. They are like members added to the hereditary state of the prince who acquires them, as is the kingdom of Naples to the king of Spain. Dominions so acquired are either accustomed to living under a prince or used to being free, and they are acquired either with the arms of others or with one's own, either by fortune or by virtue. Chapter 2, Hereditary Principalities. I shall leave out reasoning on republics. Because I have reasoned on them at length another time. I shall address myself only to the principality, and shall proceed by weaving together the threads mentioned above, and I shall debate how these principalities may be governed and maintained. I say then, that in hereditary states accustomed to the bloodline of the prince, and the difficulties in maintaining them are much less than in new states, because it is enough only not to depart from the order of its ancestors, and then to temporize in the face of accidents. In this way, if such a prince is of ordinary industry, he will always maintain himself in his state, unless there is an extraordinary and excessive force which deprives him of it. And should he be deprived of it, if any mishap whatever befalls the occupier, he reacquires it. Oh my goodness, my words. We have in Italy, for example, the Duke of Ferrara, who, for no other cause than his line was ancient in that dominion, did not succumb to the attacks of the Venetians in 84, nor to those of Pope Julius in 10. For the natural prince has less cause and less necessity to offend, hence it is fitting that he be more loved. And if extraordinary vices do not make him hated, it is reasonable that he will naturally have the good will of his own. In the antiquity and continuity of the dominion, the memories and causes of innovations are eliminated, for one change always leaves a dentation for the building of another. 3. Of mixed principalities. But the difficulties reside in the new principality first, if it is not altogether new but like an added member, so that taken as a whole it can be called almost mixed. Its instability arises in the first place from a natural difficulty that exists in all new principalities. This is that men willingly change their lords in the belief that they will fare better. This belief makes them take up arms against him, in which they are deceived, because they see later by experience that they have done worse. That follows from another natural and ordinary necessity, which requires that one must always offend those over whom he becomes a new prince. But with men at arms and with infinite other injuries that the new acquisition brings in its wake, so you have as enemies as those whom you have offended in seizing that principality. And you cannot keep as friends those who have put you there, because you cannot satisfy them in the mode they had presumed, and because you cannot use strong medicines against them, since you are obliged to them. For even though one may have the strongest of armies, he always needs the support of the inhabitants of a province in order to enter it. Through these causes, Louis the Second of France quickly occupied Milan and quickly lost it. And Ludovico's own forces were enough to take it from him in the first time. For those people which had opened the gates to him, finding themselves deceived in their opinion, and in that future good they have pursued for themselves, were unable to tolerate the vexations of the new prince. It is indeed true that when countries that have rebelled are later acquired for the second time, they are lost with more difficulty, because the Lord, seizing the opportunity offered by the rebellion, is less hesitant to secure himself by punishing offenders, exposing suspects, and providing for himself in the weakest spots. So it was that, if one Duke Ludovico stirring up a commotion at the borders was enough to make France lose Milan the first time, to make him then lose it the second time, the whole world had to be against him, and his armies eliminated or chased from Italy. This arises from the causes given above. Nonetheless, both the first and the second times it was taken from him, the universal causes of the first have been discussed. It remains now to say that what were the cause of the second, and to see what remedies there were to him, which someone in his situation could use so as to maintain himself better in his acquisition than France did. Now I say, that such states which when acquired are added to an ancient state of him who acquires them, are either of the same province and the same language or not. When they are, they may be held with great ease, especially if they are not used to living free. And to possess them securely, it is enough to have eliminated the line of the prince whose dominions they were. For when their old conditions are maintained for them in other things and there is no disparity of custom, men live quietly. As it may be seen that Burgundy, Brittany, Gascony, and Normandy, which have been with France for so long a time, have done. And although there may be some disparity of language, nonetheless the customs are similar, and they can easily bear with one another. And whoever acquires them, if he wants to hold them, must have two concerns. One, that the bloodline of the ancient prince be eliminated. The other, not to alter either laws or their taxes, so that in a very short time it becomes one whole body with their ancient principality. Yep. But when one acquires states in a province disparate in language, customs, and orders, here are the difficulties. And here one needs to have great fortune and great industry to hold them. And one of the greatest and quickest remedies would be for whoever acquires it to go there to live in person. This would make the possession more secure and more lasting, as the Turk have done in Greece, despite all the other orders observed by him so as to hold that state. If he had gone there to live, it would not have been possible for him to hold it. For if you stay there, disorders may be seen as they arise, and you can soon remedy them. If you are not there, disorders become understood when they are great and there is no longer a remedy. Besides this, the province is not despoiled by your officials. The subjects are satisfied with ready access to the prince, so that they have more cause to love him if they want to be good, and if they want to be otherwise, more cause to fear him. Whatever outsider might want to attack that state has more hesitation in doing so. Hence, when one lives in it, one can lose it with the greatest difficulty. The other, better remedy is to send colonies that are, as it were, fetters of that state, to one or two places, because it is necessary either to do this or to hold them with many men at arms and infantry. One does not spend much on colonies and without expense of one's own, and with little one may send them and hold them, and one offends only those from whom one takes fields and houses in order to give them new inhabitants, who are very small part of the state. And those whom he offends, since they remain dispersed and poor, can never harm him. while all the others remain on one hand unhurt. And for this, they should be quiet. On the other, they are afraid to err from fear that what happened to the despoiled might happen to them. I conclude that such colonies are not costly, are more faithful and less offensive, and those who are offended can do no harm, since they are poor and dispersed, as was said. For this has not thus to be noted that men should either be caressed or eliminated, because they avenge themselves for slight offenses, but cannot do so for grave ones. So the offense one does to a man should be such that one does not fear revenge for it. Damn! Damn! Sheesh! What the fuck? But when one holds a state with men at arms in place of colonies, one spends much more, since one has to consume all the income of that state in guarding it. So the acquisition turns to loss, and one offends much more because one harms the whole state as one's army moves around for lodgings. Everyone feels this hardship, and each becomes one's enemy. And these are enemies that can harm one since they remain, though defeated, in their homes from every side. Therefore, keeping guard in this way is useless, as keeping guard by means of colonies is useful. Whoever is in a province that is disparate, as was said, should also make himself head and defender of the neighboring lesser powers, and contrive to weaken the powerful in that province, as to take care that through some accident a foreigner as powerful as he does not enter there. And it will always turn out that the foreigner will be brought in by those in the province who are malcontent, either because too much ambition or out of fear, as once the Aetolians were seen to bring the Romans into Greece. And in every other province they entered, they were brought in by its inhabitants. Ugh. Oh my goodness, I'm fumbling my words. And the order of things is such that as soon as a powerful foreigner enters a province, all those in it who are less powerful adhere to him, moved by the envy they have against whoever has held power over them. So with respect to these lesser powers, he has no trouble in gaining them, because altogether they quickly and willingly make one mass with the state that he has acquired there. He has only to worry that these lesser powers may get too much force and too much authority. And with his forces and their support, he can easily put down those who are powerful, so as to remain arbiter of that province in everything. And whoever does not conduct this policy well will soon lose what he has acquired, while he holds it, will have infinite difficulties and vexations within it. The Romans observed these policies well in the provinces they took. They sent out colonies, indulged lesser powers without increasing their power, put down the powerful, and did not allow foreign powers to gain reputation there. And I want the province of Greece alone to suffice as an example. The Achaeans and the Aetolians were indulged by the Romans. The kingdom of the Macedonians was brought down, and the Antiochus was chased out. Nor did the merits of the Achaeans or those of the Aetolians make the Romans permit them to increase any state of theirs, nor did the persuasions of Philip ever induce them to be his friends without putting him down, nor could the power of the Antiochus make them consent to his holding any state in that province. For the Romans did in these cases what all wise princes should do. They not only have to have regard for present troubles, but also for future ones. They have to avoid this with all their industry, because when one foresees from afar, one can easily find a remedy for them. But when you wait until they come close to you, the medicine is not in time, because the disease has become incurable. And it happens with this, as the physicians say of consumption, that in the beginning of illness it is easy to cure and difficult to recognize. But in the progress of time, when it has not been recognized and treated in the beginning, it becomes easy to recognize and difficult to cure. So it happens in affairs of state, because when one recognizes from afar that the evils that arise in a state, they are soon healed. But when they are left to grow because they were not recognized, to the point that everyone recognizes them, there is no longer any remedy for them. Thus, the Romans, seeing inconveniences from afar, always found remedies for them and never allowed them to continue so as to escape a war, because they knew that war may not be avoided but is deferred to the advantage of others. So they decided to make war with Philip and Antiochus in Greece, in order not to have to do so in Italy. And they could have avoided both one and other for a time, but they did not want to, nor did that saying ever please them, which is every day in the mouths of the wise men of our times, to enjoy the benefit of time, but rather they enjoy the benefit of their virtue and prudence. For time sweeps everything before it and can bring with it good as well as evil, and evil as well as good. But let us return to France and examine whether he has done any of the things spoken of. I will speak for Louis and not of Charles, as the steps of the former, because he held his possession in Italy longer, may be seen better. And you will see that he did the contrary of the things that should be done to hold a state in a disparate province. King Louis was brought into Italy by the ambition of the Venetians, who wanted to gain half the state of Lombardy for themselves by his coming. I did not want to blame the course adopted by the king, for since he wanted to begin by gaining a foothold in Italy and having no friends in this province, indeed, having all doors closed to him because the conduct of King Charles, he was forced to take whatever friendships he could get. And having firmly adopted this course, he would have succeeded if in managing other things he had not made some error. Thus, when he had acquired Lombardy, the king regained quickly the reputation that Charles had taken from him. Genoa yielded, and the Florentines became his friends. The Marquis of Mantua, Duke of Ferrara, Bentivoglio, Madonna of Forli, the lords of Faenza, of Pesaro, Rimini, Camerino, Piombino, the Lucans, Pisans, Sienese, everyone came to meet him so as to become his friends. And then the Venetians could consider the temerity of the course they had adopted. To acquire 2 lands in Lombardy, they made the king lord of 2/3 of Italy. One may now consider with how little difficulty the king could have maintained his reputation in Italy if he had observed the rules written above and have held secure and defended all those friends of his, who, because they were a great number, weak and fearful, some of the church, some of the Venetians, were always under the necessity to stay with him, and by their means he could always have secured himself easily against whoever remained great among us. But no sooner was he in Milan that he did the contrary by giving aid to Pope Alexander, so that the Pope might seize the Romagna, nor did he notice that with this decision he was weakening himself, stripping himself of his friends and those who had jumped into his lap, while making the church great by adding so much temporal greatness to the spiritual one that gives it so much authority. And having made the first error, he was compelled to continue, so that to put an end to the ambition of Alexander and to prevent his becoming Lord of Tuscany, he was compelled to come into Italy. It was not enough for him to have made the church great and to have stripped himself of his friends, but because he wanted the kingdom of Naples, he divided it with the king of Spain, whereas at first he was the arbiter of Italy. He brought in a companion so that the ambitious ones in that province and those malcontent with him had somewhere to turn. And whereas he could have left in that kingdom a king who was his pensioner, he threw him out so as to bring in one who could expel him. And truly it is a very natural and ordinary thing to desire to acquire, and always when men do it who can, they will be praised and not blamed. But when they cannot and wish to do it anyway, here lie the error and blame. Thus, in France could have attacked Naples with his own forces, he should have done so. If he could not, he should not have divided Naples. And if the division of Lombardy he made with the Venetians deserves excuses because with it France gained a foothold in Italy, this other one deserves blame because it was not excused by that necessity. So then Louis had made these 5 errors. He had eliminated the lesser powers, increased the power of a power in Italy, brought in a very powerful foreigner, did not come to live there, did not put colonies in there. Yet if he had lived, these errors could not have hurt him if he had not made the 6th. Depriving the Venetians of the state, for if he had not made the church great or brought Spain into Italy, it would indeed have been reasonable and necessary to put down the Venetians. But when he had adopted these courses first, he should never have consented to their ruin. For while they were powerful, they would always have kept others away from a campaign in Lombardy. Whether it was because the Venetians would not have consented to them unless they themselves were to become its lords, or because the others would not have wanted to take Lombardy from France in order to give it to the Venetians, and they would not have the spirit to go and attack both of them. And if someone should say, King Louis ceded Romagna to Alexander and the kingdom to Spain to avoid a war, I reply with the reasons given above, that a disorder should never be allowed to continue so as to avoid a war, because that is not to avoid it but to defer it to your disadvantages. And if some others should cite the faith that the king had pledged to the Pope to undertake that enterprise for him in return for dissolving his marriage and for the hat of ruin, I reply with what I say below on the fate of princes and how it should be observed. Thus, King Louis lost Lombardy for not having observed any of the conditions observed by others who have taken provinces and wish to hold them. Nor is this any miracle, but very ordinary and reasonable. And I spoke of this matter at Nantes with Rouen when Valentino was occupying Romagna. For when the Cardinal of Rouen said to me that the Italians do not understand war, I replied to him that French do not understand the state. Because if they understood, they would not have let the church come to such greatness. And it may be seen from experience that the greatness in Italy of the church of Spain has been caused by France, and France's ruin caused by them. From this one may draw a general rule that never or rarely fails. Whoever is the cause of someone's becoming powerful is ruined, for that power has been caused by him either with industry or with force. And both the one and the other of these two are suspected to whoever has become powerful. To our suspect to our... What? Chapter 4. Why the kingdom of Darius, which Alexander seized, did not rebel from his successors after Alexander's death. That is quite a question. Wait, let me just pull up my drink. Wait a second. Fuck, where's my meds? The difficulties that are involved in holding a state newly acquired having been considered, one might marvel at how it happened that Alexander the Great became Lord of Asia in a few years, and just after he seized it, died, from which it appeared reasonable that all state would rebel. Nonetheless, the successors of Alexander maintained it and had no other difficulty in holding it than that which arose among themselves out of their own ambition. That is quite a question. That is quite something to ask yourself. Yeah. Okay. Are part of principalities of which memory remains have been governed in two diverse modes, either by one prince and all the other servants who as ministers have governed the kingdom by his favor and appointment, or by a prince and by barons who hold that rank not by favor of the Lord but by antiquity of bloodline. Such barons have their own states and subjects who recognize them as lords and hold them in natural affection. States that are governed by one prince and his servants hold their prince in greater authority because in all his province there is no one recognized as superior but himself. Even if they obey someone else, they do so as a minister and official, and do not bear him any particular love. And in our times, the examples of these two diverse kinds of governments are the Turk and the King of France. The whole monarchy of the Turk is governed by one lord. The others are his servants. Dividing his kingdom into sanjaks, he sends different administrators to them and he changes and varies them as he likes. But the King of France is placed in the midst of an ancient multitude of lords, acknowledged in the state by the subjects and loved by them. They have their privileges and the king cannot take them away without danger to himself. Thus, whoever considers the one and the other of these states will find difficulty in acquiring the state of the Turk. But should it be conquered, great ease in holding it. So, inversely, you will find in some respects more ease in seizing the state of France, but great difficulty in holding it. Yep. The causes of the difficulties in being able to seize the kingdom of the Turk are that one cannot be called in by the princes in that kingdom, and that one cannot hope to facilitate the enterprise through the rebellion of those around him. This arises from the reasons given above. For since all are slaves and bound by obligation, they can be corrupted with much difficulty. And even if they are corrupted, one can hope but for little use from it, as they cannot bring their people with them. For the reasons indicated. Yeah. Hence, whoever attacks the Turk must necessarily assume that he will find him entirely united, and he had better put his hope more in his own forces than in the disorder of others. But once the Turk has been overcome and defeated in the field in such a way that he cannot rally his armies, one has only to fear the bloodline of the prince. If this is eliminated, there remains no one whom one would have to fear, since others do not have credit with the people, and just as the victor could put no hope in them before his victory, so he should not fear them after it. The contrary occurs with kingdoms governed like France, because you can easily enter there, having won over to yourself some baron of the kingdom, for malcontents and those who desire to innovate are always to be found. For the reasons given, they can open the way for you in that the state and facilitate victory for you. Then your wish to maintain that victory for yourself brings in its wake indefinite difficulties, both from those who have helped you and from those who have oppressed. Nor it is enough for you to eliminate the bloodline of the prince, because lords remain there who put themselves at the head of new changes. And since you can neither content them nor eliminate them, you lose that state whenever the opportunity comes. Now, if you consider what was the nature of Darius's government, you will find it similar to the kingdom of the Turk. Therefore, for Alexander, it was necessary first to make an all-out attack on him and drive him from the field. After this victory, with Darius dead, the state remained secure for Alexander for the reasons discussed above. And if his successors had been united, they could have enjoyed it at leisure. Nor did any tumults occur in that kingdom besides those they themselves incited. But it is impossible to possess states other like France with such quiet. Hence arose the frequent rebellions in Spain, France, and Greece against the Romans. Because of the numerous principalities that existed in those states, as long as their memory lasted, the Romans were always uncertain of their possession. But when the memory was eliminated with the power of long duration of the empire, the Romans became secure possessors of them, and the Romans possessed them even though when they later fought among themselves, each took for themselves a part of this province in accordance with the authority had gone with it. And the provinces, because the bloodline of their former lords was eliminated, acknowledged no one but the Romans. Having considered all these things, therefore, no one will marvel at the ease with which Alexander held the state of Asia, and at the difficulties of others such as Pyrrhus, and many more like him had in keeping their acquisitions. This has come not from much or little virtue in the victor, but from the disparity of the subject. How cities or principalities which lived by their own laws before they were occupied should be administered. Damn, I'm still in like page 32. It's gonna be a long read, man. I'm gonna be here for quite a while. I'm gonna be here for quite a while. How cities or principalities which lived by their own laws before they were occupied should be administered. When those states are acquired, as has been said, are accustomed to living by their own laws and in liberty, there are three modes for those who want to hold them. First, ruin them. Second, go there to live personally. Third, let them live by their laws, taking tribute from them and creating with them an oligarchical state which keeps them friendly to you. For since such a state has been created by that prince, it knows it cannot stand without his friendship. It knows it cannot stand without his friendship and power, and it has to do everything to maintain him. And a city used to living free may be held more easily by means of its own citizens than in any other mode, if one wants to preserve it. As examples, there are the Spartans and the Romans. The Spartans held Athens and Thebes by creating oligarchical states there, yet they lost them again. The Romans, in order to hold Capua, Carthage, and Numantia, destroyed them and did not lose them. They wanted to hold Greece much as the Spartans had held it, by making it free and leaving it its own laws. But they did not succeed, so they were compelled to destroy many cities in that province so as to hold it. For in truth, there is no secure mode to possess them other than to ruin them. And whoever becomes patron of a city accustomed to living free and does not destroy it, should expect to be destroyed by it. For it always has a refuge in rebellion the name of liberty and its own ancient orders which are never forgotten either through the length of time or because of benefits received. Whatever one does or provides for, unless the inhabitants are broken up or dispersed, they will not forget that name and those orders, and will immediately record to them upon any accident, as did Pisa after having been kept in servitude 100 years by the Florentines. But when cities or provinces are used to living under a prince, and his bloodline is eliminated, since on the one hand they are used to obeying, and on the other they do not have the old prince, they will not agree to make one from among themselves, and they do not know how to live free. So they are slower to take up arms, and a prince can gain them with greater ease and secure himself against them. But in republics there is greater life, greater hatred, more desire for revenge. The memory of the ancient liberty does not and cannot let them rest, so that the most secure path is to eliminate them or live in them. Chapter 6 of New Principalities that are acquired through one's own arms and virtue. Oof. Like, how do you acquire a freaking state through virtue? Principalities is basically this certain power or like throne. No one should marvel if in speaking as I will do of principalities that are altogether new both in prince and in state. I bring up the greatest examples, for since men always walk on paths beaten by others and proceed in their actions by imitation, unable either to stay in their paths of others altogether or to attain the virtue of those whom you imitate, a prudent man should always enter upon the paths beaten by great men, and imitate those who have been most excellent, so that if his own virtue does not reach that far, it is at least in the order of it. You should do as prudent archers do when they place their plan to hit appears too distant, and knowing how far the strength of their bow carries, they set their arm much higher than their place intended, not to reach such height with their arrow, but to be able with the aid of so high an aim to achieve their plan. I say then, that in altogether new principalities, where there is a new prince, one encounters more or less difficulty in maintaining them according to whether one who acquires them is more or less virtuous. And because the result of becoming a prince from private individual presupposes either virtue or fortune, it appears that one or the other of these two things relieves in part many difficulties. Nonetheless, he who has relied less on fortune has maintained himself more. To have the prince compelled to come to live there in person because he has no other states makes it still easier. But to come to those who have become princes by their own virtue and not by fortune, I say that the most excellent are Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, Theseus, and the like. And although one should not reason about Moses as he was a mere executor of things that have been ordered for him by God, nonetheless he should be admired if only for that grace which made him deserving of speaking with God. But let us consider Cyrus, and the others who have acquired or founded kingdoms. You will find them all admirable, and if their particular actions and orders are considered, they will appear no different from those of Moses, who had so great a teacher. And as one examines their actions and lives, one does not see that they have anything else from fortune than the opportunity, which gave them the matter enabling them to introduce any form they please. Without that opportunity, their virtue of spirit would have been eliminated, and without that virtue, the opportunity would come in vain. It was necessary then for Moses to find the people of Israel in Egypt, enslaved and oppressed by the Egyptians, so that they would be disposed to follow him as to get out of their servitude. It was fitting for Romulus to be received in Alba that he should have been exposed at birth, if he was to become king of Rome and founder of that fatherland. Cyrus needed to find that Persians malcontent with the empire of the Medes, and the Medes soft and effeminate because of a long peace. Theseus could not have demonstrated his virtue if he had not found the Athenians dispersed. Such opportunities therefore made these men happy, and their excellent virtue enabled the opportunity to be recognized. Hence their fatherlands were ennobled by it and become very happy. Those like these men who become princes by their paths of virtue acquire the principality with difficulty, but hold it with ease. And the difficulties they have in acquiring a principality arises in part from their new orders and modes that they are forced to introduce as to found their state and their security. And it should be considered that nothing is more difficult to handle, more doubtful to success, nor more dangerous to manage than to put oneself at the head of introducing new orders. For the introducer has all those who benefit from the old orders as enemies, and he has lukewarm defenders in all those who might benefit from the new orders. This lukewarmness arises partly from fear of adversaries who have the laws in their side, and partly from the incredulity of men, who do not truly believe in new things unless they come to have a firm experience of them. Consequently, whenever those who are enemies have opportunity to attack, they do so with partisan zeal, and the others defend lukewarmly so that one is in peril along with them. Where were we? Verse 2. Consequently, whenever those who are enemies are urgently attacked, they will do so with partisan zeal, and the others defend lukewarmly so that one is in peril along with them. It is, however, necessary, if one wants to discuss this aspect well, to examine whether these innovators stand by themselves or depend on others. That is, whether to carry out their deed they must beg or indeed can use force. Yup. In the first case, they always come to ill and never accomplish anything. But when they depend on their own and are able to use force, then it is that they are rarely in peril. From this, it arises that all that armed prophets conquered and the unarmed ones are ruined. What? That all the armed prophets conquered and the unarmed ones. For besides the things that have been said, the nature of peoples is variable, and it is easy to persuade them of something, but difficult to keep them in that persuasion. And thus things must be ordered in such a mode that when they no longer believe, one can make them believe by force. Moses, Cyrus, Theseus, and Romulus would not have been able to make their peoples observe their constitutions well, make their peoples observe their constitutions for long if they had been unarmed, as happened in our times to brother Girolamo Savonarola. He was ruined in his new orders as soon as the multitude began not to believe in them, and he had no more for holding firm those who had believed, nor for making unbelievers believe. Men such as these, therefore, find great difficulty in conducting their affairs. All their dangers are along the path, and they must overcome them with virtue. But once they have overcome them and they begin to held in veneration, having eliminated those who envied them for their quality, they remain powerful, secure, honored, and happy. To such high examples, I want to add a lesser example, but it will have some proportion with the others, and I want it to suffice for all other similar cases. Thus, this is Hiero Syracuse. From private individual he became Prince of Syracuse, nor did he receive anything more from fortune than the opportunity. For when Syracuse was oppressed, they chose him as their captain, and from there he provided, worthy of being made their prince. And he was of such virtue, even in private fortune, that he who wrote of him said that he lacked nothing of being a king except a kingdom. Wow. That is, what the fuck? Damn, that is quite something to be able to say them for you, man. Hiero eliminated the old military and organized a new one. He left his old friendships and made new ones. And when he had friendships and soldiers that were his own, he could build any building on top of such a foundation. So he went through a great deal of trouble to acquire and little to maintain. Damn. So it's much better to acquire things by virtue rather than by fortune. Of new principalities that are acquired by others, arms and fortune. Those who become princes from private individuals solely by fortune became so with little trouble, but maintain themselves with much. They have no difficulty along the path because they fly there, but all the difficulties arise when they are in place. And such princes come to be when a state is given to someone either for money or by the favor of whoever gives it, as happened to men in Greece, in the cities of Ionia, and of the Hellespont, when they were made princes by Darius, so that they might hold on those cities for security and glory. As also those emperors were made who from private individual attained the empire through corrupting the soldiers. These persons rest simply on the will and fortune of whoever has given a state to them, which are two very inconstant and unstable things. They do not know how to hold, they cannot hold that rank. They do not know how to hold, and they cannot hold that rank. They do not know how, because if one is not a man of great ingenuity and virtue, it is not reasonable that having always lived in private fortune, he should know how to command. They cannot hold that rank because they do not have forces that can be friendly and faithful to them. Then too, states that come to be suddenly, like all other things in nature that are born and grown quickly, cannot have roots and branches, so that the first adverse weather eliminates them, unless, indeed, as was said, those who have suddenly become princes have so much virtue that they know immediately how to prepare to keep what fortune has placed in their laps, and that the foundations that the others have laid before becoming a prince, before becoming princes, they lay afterwards. To both the modes mentioned of becoming prince, by virtue or by fortune, I want to bring up two examples that have occurred in days without our memory, and these are Francesco Sforza and Cesare Borgia. Cesar Borgia. Francesco became Duke of Milan from private individual by proper means, with a great virtue of his own, and that which he had acquired with 1,000 pains he maintained with little trouble. On the other hand, Cesare Borgia, called Duke Valentino by the vulgar, acquired his state through the fortune of his father and lost it through the same. Notwithstanding the fact that he had made use of every deed and did all those things that should have done by a prudent and virtuous man to put his roots in the states and the arms in the fortune of others had given him. For as was said above, whoever does not lay his foundations at first might be able, with great virtue, to lay them later, although they might have to be laid with hardship for the architect, with danger to the building. Thus, if one considers all the steps of the Duke, one will see that he had laid for himself great foundations for future power, which I do not judge superfluous to discuss, for I do not know what better teaching I could give to a new prince than the example of his actions. And if his orders do not bring profit to him, it was not his fault, because this arose from an extraordinary and extreme malignity of fortune. Alexander VI had very many difficulties, both present and future, when he decided to make his son the Duke great. First, he did not see the path to being able to make him lord of any state that was not state of the church. And when he decided to take that of the church, he knew that the Duke of Milan and the Venetians could not consent to it, because Faenza and Rimini had for long been under the protection of the Venetians. Besides this, he saw that the arms of Italy, especially in the arms of anyone whom he might have been able to make use of, were in the hands of those who had to fear the greatness of the Pope. And so he could not trust them, and they were all in the Orsini and the Cologna and their accomplices. It was thus necessary to upset those orders and to bring disorder to their states, as to be able to make himself lord securely of part of them. This was easy for him, because he found the Venetians, moved by other causes, were engaged in getting the French to come back to Italy, which he did not oppose, but made easier by the dissolution of the former marriage of King Louis. So the king came to Italy with the aid of the Venetians and the consent of Alexander, and he was no sooner in Milan than the Pope got men from him for a campaign in Romagna, which was granted to him because of the reputation of the king. So after the Duke had acquired Romagna and beaten down the Colonna, two things prevented him from maintaining that and going further ahead. One, that his arms did not appear to him to be faithful. The other, the will of France, that is, the Orsini arms, which he had availed himself, might fail under him, and not only prevent him from acquiring, but also take away what he had acquired. And the king might also do the same to him. He had a test of the Orsini when after the capture of Faenza, he attacked Bologna, and saw them go coolly to that attack. And regarding the king, the duke knew his mind when after he had taken the duchy of Urbino, he attacked Tuscany, and the king made him desist from that campaign. Hence, the duke decided to depend no longer on the arms and fortune of others, and the first thing he did was to weaken the Orsini and Colonial parties in Rome, for he gained to himself all their adherents who were gentlemen by making them his gentlemen and by giving them large allowances. And he honored them, according to their qualities, with commands and with government posts, so that in a few months the partisan affections in their minds were eliminated, and all affection turned toward the duke. After this, he waited for an opportunity to eliminate the heads of the Orsini. Since he had dispersed those of the Colonial house, a good one came to him, and he used it better. For when the Orsini became aware, late, that the greatness of the duke and the church was ruined for them, they held a meeting in Magion near Perugia. From that arose rebellion in Urbino, tumults in Romagna, and infinite dangers for the duke, who overcame them all with the aid of the French. And when his reputation had been restored, he trusted neither France nor other external forces, and so as not to put them to the test, he turned to deceit. He knew so well how to dissimulate his intent that the Orsini themselves, through Signor Paolo, became reconciled with him. The duke did not fail to fulfill every kind of duty to secure Signor Paolo, giving him money, garments, and horses, so that their simplicity brought them in the duke's hands in Sinigaglia. So when these heads had been eliminated and their partisans had been turned into his friends, the duke had laid very good foundations for his power. Since he had all Romagna with the duchy of Urbino, he thought especially that he had acquired the friendships of Romagna, that he had gained all those peoples to himself since they had begun to taste well-being. And because this point is deserving of notice and of being imitated by others, I do not want to leave it out. Once the duke has taken over Romagna, he found it had been commanded by impotent lords who had been readier to despoil their subjects than to correct them, and had given their subjects matter of disunion, not for union. Since that province was quite full of robberies, quarrels, and every kind of insolence, he judged it necessary to give it good government. If he wanted to reduce it to peace and obedience to a kingly arm, so he put there Messer Remiro de Orco, a cruel and ready man to whom he gave the fullest power. In a short time, Ramiro reduced it to peace and unity, with the very greatest reputation for himself. Then the duke judged that such excessive authority was not necessary, because he feared that it might become hateful, and he set up a civil court in the middle of the province, with the most excellent precedent where each city had its advocate. And because he knew that past rigors had generated some hatred for Ramiro, to purge the spirits of that people and to gain them entirely to himself, he wished to show that if any cruelty had been committed, this has not come from him but the harsh nature of his minister. And having seized this opportunity, he had him placed one morning in the piazza of Casena in 2 pieces, with a piece of wood and a bloody knife beside him. The ferocity of his spectacle left the people at once satisfied and stupefied. Exactly. That is wow. But let us return to where he left off, and say that when the duke found himself very powerful and secure in part against present dangers, since he had armed the suit himself and had in good part eliminated those arms which were near enough to have attacked him, there remained for him, if he wanted to proceed with the acquisition, to consider the king of France, for he knew that this would not be tolerated by the king, who had been late to perceive his error. And so he began to seek out new friendships and to vacillate with France in the expedition that the French were making toward the kingdom of Naples against the Spanish who were besieging Gaeta. His intent was to secure himself against them, in which he would soon have succeeded if Alexander had lived. And these were his arrangements as to present things. But as to the future, he had to fear, first, that the new successor in the church might not be friendly to him and might seek to take away what Alexander had given him. He thought he might secure himself against this in 4 modes. First, to eliminate the bloodlines of those lords he had despoiled, as to take that opportunity away from the Pope. Second, to win over himself all the gentlemen in Rome, as was said, as to be able to hold the Pope in check with them. Third, to make the college of cardinals as much as his as he could. Fourth, to acquire so much empire before the Pope died that he could resist a first attack of his own. Of these 4 things, he had accomplished 3 at the death of Alexander, and fourth he almost accomplished. The fourth he almost accomplished. For the lords he had despoiled, he killed as many as he could reach, and the very few saved themselves. The Roman gentleman had been won over to himself. In the college is a very large party as to new acquisitions. He had planned to become lord over Tuscany. He already possessed Perugia and Piombino, and had taken Pisa under his protection. And as soon as he did not have to pay regard to France, which he did not have to do any longer, since the French had already been stripped of the kingdom of the Spanish, so that each of them was forced of necessity to buy his friendship, he would have jumped to Pisa. After this, Lucca and Siena would have quickly yielded, in part through envy of the Florentines, in part through fear. The Florentines had no remedy. If he had succeeded in this, he would have acquired such force and reputation that he would have stood himself and would no longer have depended on the fortune and force of someone else, but on his own power and virtue. But Alexander died 5 years after he had begun to draw his sword. He left his duke with the only state of Romagna consolidated, with all the others in the air between 2 very powerful enemy armies, and sick to death. And there was such ferocity and such virtue in the duke that he knew so well how men had to be won over and lost, and so sound were the foundations that he had laid in so little time, that if he had not had these armies on his back, or if he had been healthy, he would have been equal to every difficulty. And that his foundations were good one may see. Romagna waited for him for more than a month. In Rome, though he was half alive, he remained secure, and although the Baglioni, Vitelli, and Orsini came to Rome, none followed them against him. If he could not make Pope whomever he wanted, at least he would not be someone he did not want. But if at the end of Alexander the Duke had been healthy, everything would have been easy for him. And he told me one day that Julius II was created. And told me on the day that Julius II was created that he had thought about what might happen when his father was dying, and had found a remedy for everything, except that he never thought that at his death he himself would also be on the point of dying. Thus, if I summed up all the actions of the Duke, I would not know how to reproach him. On the contrary, it seemed to me he should have been put forward, as I have done, to be imitated by all those who have risen to empire through fortune and by the arms of others. For with his great spirit and high intention, he could not have conducted himself otherwise, and the only things in the way of his plans were the brevity of Alexander's life and his own sickness. So whoever judges it necessary in his new principality to secure himself against enemies, to gain friends to himself, to conquer either by force or by fraud, to make himself loved and feared by the people, and followed and revered by the soldiers, to eliminate those who can or might offend you, to renew old orders to new modes, to be severe and pleasant, magnanimous and liberal, to eliminate an unfaithful military, to create a new one, to maintain friendships with kings and princes, so they must either benefit you with favor or be hesitant to offend you, can find no fresher examples than the actions of that man. One could only accuse him of the creation of Julius as pontiff, in which he made a bad choice. For as was said, though he could not make a pope to suit himself, he could have kept anyone from being pope. And for the papacy, he should have never have consented to those cardinals whom he had offended, or who, having become pope, would have to be afraid of him. For men offend either from fear or from hatred. Those whom he had offended were amongst others San Piero, Advincula, Colonna, San Giorgino, Ascanio, and the others, if they had become pope, would have had to fear him, except Runen and the Spaniards, the latter because of kinship and obligation, the former for his power, because he was connected to the kingdom of France. Therefore, the Duke, before everything else, should have created the Spaniard Pope, and if he could not, should have consented to Ruren and not San Piero and Advincula. And whoever believes that amongst great personages, new benefits will make all injuries be forgotten, deceives himself. So the Duke erred in this choice, and it was the cause of his ultimate ruin. Oh shit! He's not like he's willing to discuss things and to this point, man. Of those who have attained principality through crimes, like damn. Principality through crimes, damn. But because one becomes prince from private individual also by two modes which cannot be altogether attributed either to fortune or to virtue, I do not think they should be left out, although one of them can be reasoned about more amply where republics are treated. These are when one ascends to principality by some criminal or nefarious path, or when private citizen becomes prince of his fatherland by the support of his fellow citizens. So, like rebellion, like usurpation, yeah. And to speak of the first mode, it will be shown with two examples, one ancient, the other modern. Without entering otherwise into the merits of this issue, because I judge it sufficient for whoever would find it necessary to imitate them. I judge it sufficient for whoever would find it necessary to imitate them. Holy shit. It's just like, bro. It's just not giving. Machiavelli was not giving a fuck, man. He has no fucks given. Agathocles, the Sicilian, became king of Syracuse not only from private fortune but from a mean and abject one. Born of a potter, he always kept to a life of crime at every rank of his career. Nonetheless, his crimes were accompanied with such virtue of spirit and body that when he turned to the military, he rose through its ranks to become praetor of Syracuse. After he was established in that rank, he decided to become prince to hold with violence and without obligation to anyone else that which had been conceded to him by agreement. Having given intelligence of his plan to Hamilcar, the Carthaginian, who was with his armies fighting in Sicily, one morning he assembled the people and senate of Syracuse as if he had to decide things pertinent to the republic. At a signal he had ordered, he had all the senators and the riches of the people killed by his soldiers. Once they were dead, he seized and held the principate of that city without any civil controversy. And although he was defeated twice by the Carthaginians, and in the end besieged, not only he was able to defend his city, but also leaving part of his men for defense against the siege. He attacked Africa with the others. In a short time he freed Syracuse from the siege and brought the Carthaginians to dire necessity. They were compelled of necessity to come to an agreement with him, to be content with the possession of Africa, and to leave Sicily to Agathocles, With us, whoever might consider the actions and virtue of this man will see nothing or little can be attributed to fortune. For as was said above, not through anyone's support but through the ranks of the military, which he had gained for himself with 1,000 hardships and dangers, had come to the Principate and afterwards he maintained it with many spirited and dangerous policies. Yet one cannot call it virtue to kill one's citizens, betray one's friends, to be without faith, without mercy, without religion. These modes can enable one to acquire an empire, but not glory. Damn. Damn. Damn, this is... For, if one considers the virtue of Agathocles in entering into and escaping from dangers, and the greatness of his spirit in enduring and overcoming adversities, one does not see why he has to be judged inferior to any most excellent captain. Nonetheless, his savage cruelty and inhumanity, together with his infinite crimes, did not permit him to be celebrated among the most excellent men. Thus, one cannot attribute to fortune or to virtue what he had achieved without either. In our times, during the reign of Alexander VI, Liverotto da Fermo, having been left a fatherless child some years before, was brought up by a maternal uncle of his called Giovanni Fogliani. And in the first years of his youth, he was sent out to the soldiers under Paolo Vitelli. So that when he was versed in that discipline, he would attain an excellent rank in the military. Then when Paolo died, he fought under Vitellozzo, his brother, and in a very short time, since he was ingenious and dashing in person and spirit, he became the first man in his military. But as it appeared to him servile to be at the level of others, he thought that with the aid of certain citizens of Fermo, to whom servitude was dearer than the liberty of the fatherland, and with support from the Vitelli, he would seize Fermo. And he wrote to Giovanni Fogliani that since he had been away from home a few years, he wanted to come see him in his city and in some part to acknowledge his patrimony. And because he had not troubled himself for anything but to acquire honor, he wanted to come in an honorable fashion accompanied by 100 horsemen and his friends and servants, so that his citizens might see that he had not spent the time in vain. He begged Giovanni to please order that he be received honorably by the inhabitants of Fermo, which would direct honor not only to him but to Giovanni himself, since Liverotto was his ward. Thereupon Giovanni did not fail in any proper duty to his nephew, and when Liverotto had been honorably received by the inhabitants of Fermo, he was lodged in Giovanni's house. There, after a few days had passed, and after he had waited to order secretly what was necessary for his future crime, he held a most solemn banquet in which he invited Giovanni Fogliani and all the first men of Fermo. And when the food and all other entertainments customary at such banquets had been enjoyed, Liverotto, with cunning, opened certain grave discussions, speaking of the greatness of Pope Alexander and of Caesar Borgia, his son, and their undertakings. While Giovanni and the others were responding to these discussions, Liverotto at a stroke stood up, saying that these were things that should be spoken of in a more secret place, and he withdrew to a room into which Giovanni and all the other citizens came behind him. No sooner they were seated than soldiers came out of secret places and killed Giovanni and all the others. After this homicide, Liverotto, mounted on horse, rode through the town and besieged the highest magistracy in the palace, so that through fear they were compelled to obey him and to establish a government of which he was made prince. And since all those who could have hurt him because they were malcontent were dead, he strengthened himself with new civil and military orders, so that in the period of 1 year that he held the principality, he was not only secure in the city of Fermo, but had become fearsome to all his neighbors. and to overthrow him would have been as difficult as to overthrow Agathocles if he had not permitted himself to be deceived by Caesar Borgia when when at the Sinigaglia, as was said above, he took the Orsini and the Vitelli. There Liverotto too was taken, 1 year after the parricide he committed, and together with Vitellozzo, who had been his master, and his virtues and crimes, he was strangled. Somewhere could question how it happened that Agathocles, and anyone like him, after infinite betrayals and cruelties, could live for a long time secure in his fatherland, defend himself against external enemies, and never be conspired against by his citizens. Inasmuch as many others have not been able to maintain their states through cruelty even in peaceful times, not to mention uncertain times of war. I believe that this comes from cruelties badly used or well used. Those can be called well used that are done at stroke. What? So how were they able to like maintain power after doing these kinds of crimes? So the discussion of well use and bad use cruelties. Those can be called well use that are done at a stroke, out of the necessity to secure oneself, and then are not persisted in but are turned to as much utility for the subjects as one can. These cruelties are badly used, which though few in the beginning rather grow with time than are eliminated. Those who observe the first mode can have some remedy for their state with God and with men, as had Agathocles. And for others it is impossible for them to maintain themselves. Hence it should be noted that in taking hold of a state, he who seizes should review all the offenses necessary for him to commit, and do them all at a stroke, so as not to have to renew them every day, and by not renewing them to secure men and gain them to himself with benefits. Whoever does otherwise, either through timidity or through bad counsel, is always under necessity to hold a knife in his hand, nor can one ever found himself on his subjects, if, because of fresh and continued injuries, they cannot be secure against him. For injuries must be done altogether, so that being tasted less, they offend less. And benefits should be done little by little, so that they may be tasted better. And above all, a prince should live with his subjects so that no single accident, whether bad or good, has to make him change. For when necessities come in adverse times, you will not be in time for evil. And the good that you do does not help you, because it is judged to be forced on you and cannot bring you any gratitude. Damn. Damn. Of the civil principality. But coming to the other policy, when a private citizen becomes prince of his fatherland, not through crime or other intolerable violence, but with the support of his fellow citizens. I say that one ascends to this principality either with the support of the people or with the support of the great. For in every city those two diverse humors are found, which arises from this, that the people desire neither to be commanded nor oppressed by the great, and the great desire to command and oppress the people. From these two diverse appetites, one of three effects occurs in the cities: principality, liberty, or license. Principality is caused either by the people or by the great, according to which of these sides has the opportunity for it. For when the great see they cannot resist the people, they begin to give reputation to one of themselves, and they make him prince so that they can vent their appetite under his shadow. So too the people, When they see they cannot resist the great, give reputation to one, and make him prince so as to be defended with his authority. He who comes to the principality with the aid of the great maintains himself with more difficulty than the one who becomes prince with the aid of the people. Because the former finds himself prince with many around him who appear to be his equals, and because of this he can neither command them nor manage them to suit himself. But he who arrives with the principality with popular support finds himself alone there, and around him is either no one or very few who are not ready to obey. Besides this, one cannot satisfy the great with decency and without injury to others, but one can satisfy the people, for the end of the people is more decent than that of the great. Since the great want to oppress and the people want not to be oppressed. Furthermore, a prince can never secure himself against a hostile people. As there are too many against the great, he can secure himself as they are few. The worst that a prince can expect from a hostile people is to be abandoned by it. But from the great, when they are hostile, he must fear not only being abandoned, but also that they may come against him. For since there is more foresight and more astuteness in the great, they always move in time as to save themselves, and they seek rank from those they hope will win. Also, the prince always lives of necessity with the same people, but he can well do without the same great persons, since he can make and unmake them every day, and take away and give them reputation at his convenience. And to better clarify this issue, I say that the great must be considered in two modes chiefly. Either they conduct themselves so that in their proceedings they are obliged in everything to your fortune, or not. Those who are obliged and are not rapacious must be honored and loved. Those who are not obliged have to be examined in two modes. Either do this out of pusillanimity and a natural defect of spirit, then you must make use especially of those who are of good counsel, because in prosperity they bring your honor, and in adversity do not have to fear them. But when by art and for an ambitious cause they are not to be obliged, it is a sign that they are thinking more for themselves than for you. And the prince must be on guard against them, and fear them as they were open enemies. Because in adversity they will always help in ruin. Therefore, one who become prince through the support of the people should keep them friendly to him. Which should be easy for him, because they ask of him only that they not be oppressed. But one who becomes prince against the people, with the support of the great, must before everything else seek to gain the people to himself. Which should be easy for him when he takes up its protection. And since men who receive good from someone from whom they believe they would receive evil are more obliged to their benefactor, the people immediately wish him well more than if he had brought to them the principality with their support. Than if he had been brought to the principality with their support. Why is it so hard to read, man? Like, my English is not this old. It's such an old-ass Englishman. The prince can gain the people to himself in many modes, for which one cannot give certain rules because the modes vary according to circumstances, and so they will be left out. I will conclude only that for a prince it is necessary to have the people friendly, otherwise he has no remedy in adversity. Nabis, prince of Spartans, withstood a siege by all Greece and by one of Rome's most victorious armies, and defended his fatherland at his state against them. And when dangers supervened, it was enough for him to secure himself only against a few, which would not have been enough if he had a hostile people. And let no one resist my opinion in this without that trite proverb, that whoever founds on the people founds on mud. For that it is true, when a private citizen lays his foundation on them, and allows himself to think that the people will liberate him if he is oppressed by enemies or by the magistrates. But when a prince who founds on the people, who knows how to command, is a man full of heart, does not get frightened in adversity, does not fail to make other preparations, and with his spirit and his orders keep the generality of people inspired, he will never find himself deceived by them, and he will see that he has laid his foundations well. These principalities customarily run into peril when they are about to ascend from a civil order to an absolute one. Yeah. For these princes either command by themselves or by means of magistrates. In the latter case, their position is weaker and more dangerous because they remain altogether at the will of those citizens who have been put in the magistracies, who especially in adverse times can take away his state with great ease, either by turning against him or by not obeying him. And the prince does not have time in the midst of danger to seize absolute authority, because the citizens and subjects who are accustomed to receive commands from the magistrates are not ready in these emergencies to obey his. He will always have in uncertain times a shortage of those one can trust. For such a prince cannot found himself on what he sees in quiet times, when citizens have need of the state, because then everybody runs, everyone promises, and each wants to die for him when death is at a distance. Then few of them are to be found. And this test is all the more dangerous since one cannot make it but once. And so a wise prince must think of a way which his citizens always in every quality of time have need of the state and of himself, and then they will always be faithful to him. Chapter 10. Holy shit, I thought it was a short read. Thought it was a short read. Oh, we're doing chapter 10. I'm gonna finish it in chapter 10. After chapter 10, we're gonna be done. Right? Or like we do and continuing. In what mode the forces of all principalities should be measured. In examining the qualities of these principalities, one must admit another consideration, that is, whether a prince has enough of a state that he can rule by himself when he needs, or whether he is always under the necessity of being defended by others. And, to better clarify this issue, I say that I judge those capable of ruling by themselves who can by abundance of either men or money put together an adequate army and fight a battle against whoever comes to attack them. And I judge as well that those always have necessity of others who cannot appear in the field against an enemy, but are compelled of necessity to take refuge behind walls and to guard them. The first case has been discussed, and in what is to come we will say what is required for it. In the second case, one can only exhort such princes to fortify and supply their own towns, and to take no action of the countryside. And whoever has fortified his town well, and has managed the other governing of his subjects, as was said above and will be said below, will be attacked always with great hesitation. For men are always hostile to undertakings where difficulties may be seen, and one can see it is not easy to attack one who has a strong town and is not hated by the people. The cities of Germany are very free, have little countryside, and obey the emperor when they want to. They do not fear either him or any other power around, because they are so well fortified that everyone thinks their capture would be toilsome and difficult. For all of them have suitable ditches and walls and sufficient artillery. They always keep in their public stores enough to drink and to eat and to burn for a year. Besides, this so as to keep the plebs fed without loss of the public. They always keep in common supply enough to be able to give them work for a year in employments that are the nerve and the life of that city and of the industries from which the plebs is fed. They still hold military exercises in repute, and they have many institutions to maintain them. Thus, a prince who has a strong city does not make himself hated, cannot be attacked, and if indeed there is someone who would attack him, he would have to retreat in shame. For worldly things are so variable that it is next to impossible for one to stand with his armies idle in a siege for a year. And someone might reply, if the people have their possessions outside and see them burning, they will not have patience for this, and the long siege and their love for their own will make them forget the prince. I respond that a powerful and spirited prince will always overcome all those difficulties. Now by giving hope to his subjects that the evil will not last long, now by giving them fear of the enemy's cruelty, now by securing himself skillfully against those who appear to him too bold. Besides this, the enemy reasonably would burn and ruin the countryside on his arrival, at a time when men's spirits are still hot and willing for defense, and thus the prince should hesitate so much the less, because after several days, when the spirits have cooled, the damage has already been done, the evil has been received, and there is no more remedy for it. And that time they come to unite with their prince so much the more, since it appears he has an obligation towards them, their houses having been burned and their possessions ruined in his defense. And the nature of man is to be obliged as much by benefits they give as by benefits they receive. Hence, if one considers all this well, it should be difficult for a prudent prince to keep the spirits of his citizens firm in the siege, at first and later, provided he does not lack the wherewithal for life and for defense. Damn. Damn. Of ecclesiastical principalities. So these are like, phew. It remains now only to reason about ecclesiastical principalities. All difficulties regarding them come before they are possessed, because they are acquired either by virtue or by fortune, and are maintained without the one or the other. For they are sustained by others that have grown old with religion, which have been so powerful and of such a kind that they keep their princes in the state however they proceed and live. These alone have states and do not defend them. They have subjects and do not govern them. And the states, though undefended, are not taken from them. These subjects, though ungoverned, do not care, and they neither think of becoming estranged from such princes, nor can they. Thus only these principalities are secure and happy, but as they subsist by superior causes, to which the human mind does not reach, I will omit speaking of them. For since they are exalted and maintained by God. It would be the office of a presumptuous and foolhardy man to discourse on them. Nonetheless, if someone were to inquire me of how it came about that the church has come to such greatness in temporal affairs, despite the fact that before Alexander the way he said it to you. These alone have states and do not defend them. They have subjects and do not govern them. And the states, though undefended, are not taken from them. The subjects, though ungoverned, do not care, and they neither think of becoming estranged from such princes, nor can they. Thus only these principalities are secure and... Oh my goodness. Nonetheless, is someone to require me how it came about that the church has come to such greatness in temporal affairs despite the fact that before Alexander, the Italian powers, and not only those that are called powers, but every baron, lord, even the least, held her in low esteem in temporal affairs, and now a king of France trembles at her, and she has been able to remove him from Italy and to ruin the Venetians. Though this is known, is that it does not seem to me superfluous to recall a good part of it to memory. Before Charles, King of France, came to Italy, this province was under the power of the Pope. The Venetians, the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and the Florentines. These powers had to have two principal concerns. One, that a foreigner not enter Italy with arms, the other that none of them enlarge the state. Those who concerned them the most were the Pope and the Venetians. And to hold back the Venetians, the union of all others was needed. As to the defense of Ferrara, to hold down the Pope, they made use of the barons of Rome, since these were divided into two factions, Orsini and Colonna. Man, I'm drying my throat out right now. There were always cause of quarrel between them, and standing with the arms in hand under the eyes of pontiff. They keep the pontificate weak and infirm, and although a spirited pope like Sixtus sometimes rose up, still fortune or wisdom could never release him from these inconveniences. And the brevity of the lives was the cause of it. And for in 10 years on the average that a pope lived, he would have trouble putting down one of the factions. If, for instance, one pope had almost eliminated the Colonna, another one hostile to the Orsini rose up, which made the Colonna rise again, and there would not be the time to eliminate the Orsini. Thus brought the temporal forces of the Pope to be held in low esteem in Italy. Then Alexander VI arose. Of all the pontiffs there have ever been, he showed how far a pope could prevail with money and forces. With Duke Valentino as his instrument and with the invasion of the French as the opportunity. He did all the things I discussed above in the actions of the Duke, and though his intent might not have been to make the church great, but rather the Duke, nonetheless, what he did redounded to the greatness of the church. After his death, the Duke being eliminated, the church fell heir to his labors. Then came Pope Julius, and he found the church great, since she had all Romagna, and eliminated the barons in Rome, and had annihilated those factions to the blows struck by Alexander. Julius found the path still open to a mode of accumulating money never used before Alexander. These things Julius not only continued to be increased, and he thought about how to gain Bologna for himself, eliminated the Venetians, and expelled the French from Italy. All these enterprises succeeded for him, and with all the more praise, inasmuch as he did everything in the increase of the church and not of some private individual. He also kept the Orsini and Colonna parties with the same limits in which he found them. And although there might be some head among them ready to make a change, still two things restrained them. One, the greatness of the church, which frightened them. The other, not having cardinals of their own, for they are the origin and the tumults among them. Nor will these parties ever be quiet as long as they have cardinals, for cardinals nourish parties within Rome and without, and the barons are forced to defend them. Thus, for the ambition of prelates arise disorders and tumults among the barons. His Holiness Pope Leo then has found his pontificate most powerful. One may hope that if the others made it great with arms, he, with his goodness and infinite other virtues, can make it great even and venerable. Damn. Damn. He really discusses like a lot of things, yeah? It's like really okay, I'm gonna end. I think I might end it here. Like, let's end in chapter 13. Yeah, let's end in chapter 13. Anyways, reading this is like my English is quite like very difficult for me to understand it with like my English, but it's the English is quite hard to understand. But I do understand quite a bit, bits and pieces from it, and it's like, yeah, I can relate. It seems like it's actually really there, like how the like people rose to power and all those things. Actually, like he's like the Machiavelli thinks like it's much better to be feared than to be loved. Sometimes work, but it's like it doesn't seem like on the earlier chapters that I've read, it doesn't seem to show it like that. It doesn't seem to show that it's much better to be feared than to be loved, especially when it comes to like earning through virtue rather than fortune, and also occupation of rather, yeah, like occupation through forces and like other means of occupation and occupying another force, like establishing things, establishing power within a state and trying to create a new kinds of power and establishing your own. It's like it doesn't seem that it's like that. Like it doesn't seem that it shows that it's like that when it comes to like reading this. It doesn't seem that he's like preaching that it's much better to be fair than be known, that the ends justify the means of governing things. And it's like it's also saying things that like these are the means for you to end it, these are the means for you to get those things, these are the means for you to get that. If you wanted power, these are how you get it. But it was like, yeah, how you get it is quite there, but he also like discusses of things of maintaining power. And some things, yeah, sometimes it's much more easier to get power through other kind of means, but it's so hard to maintain it. He discusses those, which is like quite interesting, because I'm like, where was this? How did they develop these kinds of like things when it comes to, I don't understand. Maybe I haven't read upon it yet. Maybe I do haven't read upon it, like things in. There are some other kinds of methods, because you have to like keep your friends, keep your friends happy, some kinds of things like that, and then your enemies closer, you know, like cutting off the bloodline of your freaking opposition, cutting off an entire bloodline of your opposition for them to not be able to rise up towards you. Those are like things like, if they are used to being ruled, it's so much easier for you to occupy them because they know how to be ruled. Similar culture and things makes it much more easier for you to like, yeah, for you to conquer them. The more similarities you have with each other, the more easier it is to be able to like occupy and create a principality among them. Yeah, it's like he's saying principalities, which is like much more tame other than ruling. Like power, then he's saying power over them, which is like really cool. Really cool, really nice. In what mode the forces of all principalities should be merged? So it's better, as much as you can, you must make your people feel secure under you. Like that, yeah, that is security. Your people's security is the best. And it's actually quite something that you need to reread and read again, because like some of these discussions, some of these like freaking chapters needs much more deeper thought, needs more thought put into it, and needs more discussion and like more things to like think about it. Like a lot of these things that need to be thought about much more, which is like I probably should have like I don't know. I don't know what I'm just gonna say about this. Some of its language are quite hard for me to understand, which is like because I have like brain rot. Due to brain rot, my understanding of this quite kind of English is quite. I'm having difficulty understanding this kind of English. Alright, we're not gonna finish up chapter 13, but it's like that's gonna be it for today. I didn't know we're gonna be like quite a while. Okay. How many kinds of military there are, and concerning mercenary soldiers, having discourse in particular on all the qualities of those principalities which at the beginning I proposed to reason about, having considered in some part the causes of their well-being and ill-being, and having shown the modes in which many have sought to acquire and hold. It remains for me now to discourse generally on the offense and defense befitting each of those named. We have said above that it is necessary for a prince to have good foundations for himself, otherwise he must of necessity be ruined. The principal foundations that all states have, new ones as well as old or mixed, are good laws and good arms. And because there cannot be good laws where there are not good arms, and where there are good arms there must be good laws. I shall leave out the reasoning on laws and shall speak of arms. I say therefore that the arms with which a prince defends his state are either his own, or mercenary, or auxiliary, or mixed. Mercenary and auxiliary arms are useless and dangerous, and if one keeps his state founded on mercenary arms, one will never be firm or secure, for they are disunited, ambitious, without discipline, unfaithful, bold among friends, among enemies, cowardly. No fear of God, no faith with men. Ruin is postponed only as long as attack is postponed. And in peace you are despoiled by them, in war by the enemy. The cause of this is that they have no love nor cause to keep them in the field other than a small stipend, which is not sufficient to make them want to die for you. They do indeed want to be your soldiers while you are not making war, but when war comes, they either flee or leave. It should be little trouble for me to persuade anyone of this point, because the present ruin of Italy is caused by nothing other than its having relied for a period of many years on mercenary arms. These arms once made some progress for some, and may have appeared bold amongst themselves, but when the foreigner came, they showed what they were. Hence, Charles, King of France, was allowed to seize Italy with chalk. And he who said that our sins were the cause of it spoke the truth. But the sins were surely not those he believed, but the ones I have told of, and because these were sins of princes, they too have suffered the punishment for them. I want to demonstrate better the failure of these arms. Mercenary captains are either excellent men of arms or not. If they are, you cannot trust them because they always aspire their own greatness, either by oppressing you, who are their patron, or by oppressing others contrary to your intention. But if the captain is not virtuous, he ruins you in the ordinary way. And if one responds that whoever his arms in hand will do this, mercenary or not, I would reply that arms have to be employed either by a prince or by a republic. The prince should go in person and perform himself the office of captain. The republic has to send its citizens, and when it sends one who does not turn out to be a worthy man, it must change him. And if he is, it must check him with laws so that he does not step out of bounds. And by experience, one sees that only princes and armed republics make very great progress. Nothing but harm ever comes from mercenary arms. and a republic armed with its own arms is brought to obey one of its citizens with more difficulty than it is a republic armed with foreign arms. Rome and Sparta stood for many centuries armed and free. The Swiss are very well armed and very free. The Carthaginians are an example of an ancient mercenary arms. They were nearly oppressed by their own mercenary soldiers at the end of the first war with the Romans, even though the Carthaginians had their own citizens and heads. After the death of Epaminondas, Philip of Macedonia was made captain of their troops by the Thebans, and after his victory he took their liberty from them. The Milanese, after Duke Filippo died, hired Francesco Sforza against the Venetians. When he had overcome the enemy at Caravaggio, he joined with them to oppress the Milanese, his patrons. Sforza's father, in the hire of Queen Giovanna of Naples, at a stroke left her disarmed. Then, so as not to lose the kingdom, she was compelled to throw herself in the lap of King Aragon. And if the Venetians and the Florentines have in the past increased their empire with these arms, and their captains did not thereupon make themselves princes but defended them, I respond that the Florentines were favored by chance in this case, because of the virtuous captains whom they could have feared. Some did not win, some had opposition, others turned their ambition elsewhere. The one who did not win was Giovanni Acuto. Since he did not win, one could not know his faith. But everyone will confess that if he had won, the Florentines would have been at his discretion. Sforza always had Braceschi against him, so that each watched the other. Francesco turned his ambition to Lombardy, Braccio against the church and the kingdom of Naples. But let us come to what happened a little while ago. The Florentines took as their captain Paolo Vitelli, as most prudent man who from private fortune had secured very great reputation. If you have captured Pisa, no one would deny that the Florentines would have had to stay with him. Because if he had gone over in hire to their enemies, he would have had no remedy. If they had kept him, they would have to obey him. Damn. If one considers the progress of the Venetians, one will see that they acted securely and gloriously while they themselves made war. With their own gentry and armed plebs, they performed more virtuously, but when they began to fight on land, they left this virtue behind and they followed the customs of wars in Italy. And at the beginning of their expansion in land, because they did not have much of a state there, and because they were held in great repute, they did not have much to fear from their captains. But as they expanded, which was under Carmagnola, they suffered an instance of this error. For when they saw he was most virtuous, since the Duke of Milan had been defeated by them under his government, and when they learned on the other hand that he had turned cool toward the war, they judged they could no longer win with him because he did not want to, nor could they dismiss him without losing what they had acquired. So in order to secure themselves, they were forced to necessity to kill him. Then they had as their captains Bartolomeo de Bergamo, Roberto de San Severino, the Count of Pitigliano, and such. When this they had feared for loss nor for their gain, as then happened in Vaila. There they lost in one day they had acquired with such trouble in 800 years. For these arms bring only slow, late, and weak acquisitions, but sudden and miraculous losses. And because with these examples I have come into Italy, which had been governed for many years by mercenary arms, I want to discourse on them more deeply so that when their origin and progress have been seen, one can correct them better. So you have to understand that in recent times, as soon as Italy began to repel the empire, and the Pope gained much reputation in temporal affairs, Italy divided into many states. For many of the large cities took up arms against their nobles who formerly supported their emperor, had kept them under oppression, and the church supported the cities to give herself reputation in temporal affairs. Temporal affairs, like what the fuck? In many other cities, their citizens became princes over them. Hence, since Italy had almost fallen into the hands of the church and had few republics, and since the priests and other citizens did not have knowledge of arms, they began to hire foreigners. The first who gave reputation to this kind of military was Alberigo da Conio from Romagna. From his discipline came among others Braccio and Sforza, who in their times were the arbiters of Italy. After them came all the others who have governed these arms until our times, and the result of their virtue has been that Italy has been overrun by Charles, taken as booty by Louis, violated by Ferdinand, and insulted by the Swiss. The order they have held to has been first to take away the reputation of the infantry in order to give reputation to themselves. That it is because they were men without a state who lived in industry. Having a few infantry did not give them reputation, and they could not feed very many. So they were left with horse, and they were fed and honored in tolerable number. And things came to the point that in an army of 20,000 soldiers, not 2,000 infantry were to be found. Besides this, they had used all their industry to rid themselves and their soldiers of trouble and fear, by not killing one another in battles, but taking prisoners without asking ransom. They did not go against towns in the night. Those in the towns would not go against their tents. Around the camp they made neither stockade nor trench. They did not campaign in winter, and all these things were permitted in their military orders and discovered by them, as has been said, so as to escape trouble and dangers, so that they have led Italy into slavery and disgrace. Chapter 13. Yeah, this is gonna be the end of this stream for now. Or should we continue? Probably gonna be fully exhausted and like my brain cannot handle it. Yeah, my mind cannot handle it. I'm somehow like only reading and not trying to understand the full context of the text. Which is like it's really difficult for me to understand the full context of the text if I'm reading English like this. It's just like it's probably because I'm bringing and like understanding English is quite really hard. This kind of English is hard. Of auxiliary, mix, and one's own soldiers. Auxiliary arms, which are the other useless arms, are those of a power that is called to come with its arms to help and defend you, as was done by Pope Julius in recent times. When he had seen in the campaign of Ferrara the sad result of his mercenary arms, he turned to auxiliary ones, and he agreed with Ferdinand, King of Spain, that Ferdinand would help him with his men and armies. Auxiliary, they're called auxiliary. These are like all auxiliary. Okay. These arms can be useful and good in themselves, but for whoever calls them in, they are almost always harmful, because when they lose, you are undone. When they win, you are left their prisoner. And although ancient histories are full of examples, nonetheless I do not wish to depart from this recent example of Pope Julius II, whose course of trusting himself entirely into the hands of a foreigner, when he wanted Ferrara, could not have been less thought out. But his good fortune gave rise to a third thing, so that he did not reap the fruit of his bad choice.
For when his auxiliaries were defeated by Ravenna, the Swiss rose up and beyond all expectation his own and others, drove out the victors, and he came out a prisoner neither of his enemies who had fled, nor of his auxiliaries, since he had won with other arms than theirs. The Florentines, who were entirely unarmed, brought in 10,000 French to Pisa to capture it, for which course they incurred more danger than in any other time of their travails, and more danger than in any other time of their travails. The Emperor of Constantinople, so as to oppose his neighbors, sent 10,000 Turks into Greece. When the war was finished, they refused to leave. This was the beginning of the servitude of Greece under the infidels. Let him then, who wants to be unable to win, make use of these arms, since they are much more dangerous than mercenary arms. For with this, ruin is accomplished. They are all united, all resolved to obey someone else. But mercenary arms, when they have won, needed more time and greater opportunity to hurt you, since they are not one whole body and have been found and paid for by you. In them, the third party whom you may put at their head cannot quickly seize so much authority as to offend you. In mercenary arms, laziness is more dangerous. In auxiliary arms, virtue is. A wise prince, therefore, has always avoided these arms and turned to his own. He has preferred to lose with his own than to win with others, since he judges it no true victory that is acquired with an alien arms. I shall never hesitate to cite Cesar Borgia with his actions. This duke came into Romagna with auxiliary arms, leading their entirely French troops, with whom he took Imola, and Forli. But when such arms no longer appeared safe to him, he turned to mercenaries, judging there be less danger in them, and he hired the Orsini and Vitelli. Then, in managing them, he found them doubtful, unfaithful, and dangerous. He eliminated them and turned to his own arms. And one can easily see the difference between these arms if one considers what a difference there was in the reputation of the Duke when he had only the French, and when he had the Orsini and Vitelli, and when he was left with his own soldiers and himself over them. His reputation will be found always to have increased, but he was never so much esteemed as when everyone saw that he was the total owner of his arms. I did not want to depart from examples that are Italian and recent, yet I do not want to leave out Hiero of Syracuse, since he was one of those named above by me. When he, as I said, was made head of his army by the Syracusans, he knew immediately that the mercenary military was not useful because they were condottieri, set up like our Italians, since he thought he could neither keep them nor let them go. He had them all cut to pieces and then made war with his arms and not with alien arms. I want further to recall to memory a figure of the Old Testament apt for this purpose, when David offered Saul to go fight Goliath, and the Philistine challenger Saul gave to him to give him spirit, armed him with his own arms, which David, as soon as he got them, refused, saying that with them he could not give a good account of himself, and so he would rather meet the enemy with his sling and his knife. In fine, the arms of others either fall off your back or weigh you down or hold you tight. Charles VII, father of King Louis XI, who had liberated France from the English with his fortune and virtue, recognized this necessity of arming himself with his own arms, and laid down an ordinance in his kingdom for men at arms and infantry. Then his son King Louis eliminated the ordinance for infantry and began to hire the Swiss. This error, continued by others, is, as one sees now, in fact, the cause of the dangers of that kingdom. For when he gave the reputation to the Swiss, he debased all his own arms, because he has eliminated the infantry entirely, and he had obliged his men at arms the arms of others. For after they had become accustomed to fighting with Swiss, they did not think they could win without them. From this, it follows that French are not enough against Swiss, and without Swiss, do not try against anyone else. Thus, the armies of France have been mixed, part mercenary and part their own. These arms altogether are much better than simple auxiliary and simple mercenary arms, but much more inferior to one's own. And the example given is enough, because the kingdom of France would be unconquerable if the ordering of Charles had been expanded or preserved. But lack of prudence in man begins something in which, because it tastes good then, they do not perceive the poison that lies underneath. As I said above of consumptive fevers. Therefore, he who does not recognize evils when they arise in principality is not truly wise. And this is given to few. And if one considers the first cause of the ruin of the Roman Empire, one would find it to have begun only with the hiring of Goths. Because from that beginning, the forces of the Roman Empire began to weaken, and all the virtue that was taken from it was given to them. I conclude this, that without its own arms, no principality is secure. Indeed, it is wholly obliged to fortune, since it does not have virtue to defend itself in adversity. And it has always been the opinion and judgment of wise men, that nothing is so infirm and unstable as fame for power, nor sustained by one's own force. And one's own arms are those which are composed of either subjects or citizens of your creatures. All others are either mercenary or auxiliary. And the mode of ordering one's own arms will be easy to find if one reviews the orders of the four I have named above. And if one sees how Philip, father of Alexander the Great, and how many republics and princes have armed and ordered themselves, I submit myself entirely to these orders. Damn. Understanding auxiliary, huh? Holy shit. One more. One more chapter. One more chapter. One more chapter. Okay, one more chapter. One more chapter. This will put you to sleep, right? Oh my god. Oh, yeah. Let's just keep reading until this one pops up. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna keep reading until I lose my voice. Okay. I could probably reach like page 100, right? Yeah, up to 167. Yeah. What a prince should do regarding the military. Thus, a prince should have no other object nor any other thought, nor take anything else as his art but that of the war, and its orders and discipline. For that is the only art which is concerned to one who commands. And it is of such virtue that not only does it maintain those who have been born princes, but many times it enables men of private fortune to rise to that rank. And on the contrary, one sees that when princes have thought more of amenities than of arms, they have lost their states. And the first cause that makes you lose it is the neglect of this art. And the cause that enables you to acquire it is to be professional in this art. Francesco Sforza, because he was armed, became Duke of Milan from a private individual, and his sons, because they shunned the hardships of his arms, became private individuals from dukes. For among the other causes of evil that being unarmed brings you, it makes you contemptible, which is one of those infamies the prince should be on guard against, as will be said below. For there is no proportion between one who is armed and one who is unarmed, and it is not reasonable that whoever is armed obey willingly whoever is unarmed, and that someone unarmed be secure among armed servants. For since there is scorn in the one and suspicion in the other, it is not possible for them to work well together. and therefore a prince who does not understand the military, besides other happiness, cannot, as was said, be esteemed by his soldiers, nor have trust in them. Therefore, he should never leave his thoughts from the exercise of war, and in peace he should exercise it more than in war. This he can do it in two modes, one with deeds, and other with the mind. As to deeds, besides keeping his armies well ordered and exercised, he should always be out hunting, through his accustomed the body to hardships. And meanwhile he should learn the nature of sights, and recognize how mountains rise, how valleys open up, how plains lie, and understand the nature of rivers and marshes. And in this invest the greatest care. This knowledge is useful in two modes. First, one learns to know one's own country, and one can better understand its defense. Then through the knowledge of and experience with these sites, one can comprehend with ease every other site that it may be necessary to explore. For the hills, the valleys, the plains, the rivers, and the marshes that are in Tuscany, for example, have a certain similarity to those of other provinces, so that from the knowledge of a site in one province, one can easily come to the knowledge of others. And the prince who lacks this skill lacks the first part of what a captain must have, for this teaches him to find the enemy, seize lodgings, lead armies, order battles, and besiege towns to your own advantage. Among other praise given by writers to Philopoemen, prince of the Achaeans, is that in times of peace he never thought of anything but modes of war, and when he was on campaign with friends, he often stopped and reasoned with them. If the enemy were on top of the hill and we were here with our army, which of us would have the advantage? How could one advance to meet them while maintaining order? If he wanted to retreat from here, how would he have to do it? If they retreated, how would we have to follow them? And he put before them as he went along all the chances that can occur to an army. He listened to their opinions, gave his own, supported it with reason, so that because of these continued cogitations there could never arise, while he led the army, any accident from which he did not have the remedy. But as exercise of the mind, a prince should read histories and consider in them the actions of excellent men, should see how they conducted themselves in wars, should examine the causes of their victories and losses, so as to be able to avoid the latter and imitate the former. Above all, he should do as some excellent man has done in the past, who found him someone to imitate who had been praised and glorified before him, whose exploits and actions he always kept beside himself. As they say, Alexander the Great imitated Achilles, Caesar, Alexander, Scipio, Cyrus. And whoever reads the life of Cyrus written by Xenophon will then recognize the life of Scipio, how much glory that imitation brought him, how much in chastity, affability, humanity, and liberality Scipio conformed to what had been written by Cyrus of Xenophon. A wise prince should observe such modes, and never remain idle in peaceful times, but with his industry make capital of them in order to be able to profit from them in adversities, so that when fortune changes, it will find him ready to resist them. Of those things from which men and especially princes are praised or blamed. Holy shit! It remains now to see what the modes and government of a prince should be with subjects and with friends. And because I know that many have written of this, I fear that in writing of it again, I may be held presumptuous, especially since in disputing this matter I depart from the orders of others. But since my intent is to write something useful to whoever understands it, it has appeared to me more fitting to go directly to the effectual truth of the thing than to the imagination of it. And many have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in truth. But it is so far from how one lives to how one should live, that he who lets go what is done for what should be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation. Oh, For a man who wants to make a profession of good in all regards must come to ruin among so many who are not good. Hence, it is necessary to a prince, if he wants to maintain himself, to learn to be able not to be good, and to use this, and not use it according to necessity. Thus, leaving out what is imagined about the prince and discussing what is true, I say that all men, whenever one speaks of them, and especially princes, say they are placed higher, are noted for some of their qualities that bring them either blame or praise. And this is why someone is considered liberal, someone mean. Oh, avaricious? Wow. Someone who's considered a giver, someone rapacious, someone cruel, someone merciful, the one a breaker of faith, the other faithful, the one effeminate and pusillanimous. What the fuck does pusillanimous mean? This is quite an interesting word. Pusillanimous. What is it, being a pussy? Yeah, pusillanimous. It is being a pussy. Oh my goodness, pusillanimous. Yeah, effeminate is like more like, yeah, being a girl. Yep, being a girl, effeminate. The other fierce and spirited, the one humane, the other proud, the one lascivious, the other chaste, the one honest, the other astute, the one hard, the other agreeable, the one grave, the other light, the one religious, the other unbelieving, and the like. And I know that everyone will confess that it would be a very praiseworthy thing to find in a prince all of the above mentioned qualities that are held good, but because he cannot have them, nor wholly observe them, since human conditions do not permit it, it is necessary for him to be so prudent as to know how to avoid the infamy of those vices that would take his state from him, and to be on guard against those that do not. If that is possible. But if one cannot, one can let them go with less hesitation. And furthermore, one should not care about incurring the fame of those vices without which it is difficult to save one's state. For if one considers everything well, one will find something appears to be virtue, which if pursued would be one's ruin, and something else appears to be vice, which if pursued results in one's security and well-being. That is weird. And what would that be? like what would that be? Like what would be, if something appears to be virtue, it pursued one's ruin. Appears to be vice, if pursued, results in one's security and well-being. What would that be? What would that be? If one considers something virtuous, something to be virtuous, that is interesting. Interesting, this one, yeah? Interesting. Quite a conversation starter. What would that be if I were you? If you would consider things, what would that be? Okay. Beginning of liberality and parsimony. Beginning, then, with the first of the above mentioned qualities, I say that it would be good to be held liberal. Nonetheless, liberality, when used so that you may be held liberal, hurts you. Oh. For if it is used virtuously as it should be used, it may not be recognized, and you will not escape the infamy of its contrary. And so, if one man wants to maintain a name for liberality among men, it is necessary to not leave out any kind of lavish display. So that a prince who has done this will always consume all of his resources in such deeds. In the end, it will be necessary, if he wants to maintain a name for liberality, to burden the people extraordinarily, to be rigorous with taxes, and to do all those things that can be done to get money. This will begin to make him hated by his subjects, and little esteemed by anyone as he becomes poor. So having offended the many and rewarded the few with this liberality of his, he feels every least hardship and runs into risk at every slight danger. When he recognizes this and wants to draw back from it, he immediately incurs the infamy of meanness. Thus, since a prince cannot without damage to himself use the virtue of liberality so that it is recognized, he should not, if he is prudent, care about the name for meanness. For with time he will always be held more and more liberal when it is seen that with his parsimony, his income is enough for him, that he can defend himself from whoever makes war on him, that he can undertake campaigns without burdening the people. So he comes to use liberality with all those from whom he does not take, who are infinite, and meanness with those whom he does not give, who are few. In our times we have not seen great things done except by those who have been considered mean. The others have been eliminated. Pope Julius II, while he made use of a name for liberality to attain the papacy, did not think of maintaining it later, so as to be able to make war. The present King of France has carried so many wars without imposing an extraordinary tax on his subjects, only because the extra expenses were administered with his long practiced parsimony. If the present King of Spain had been held liberal, he would not have been able to make or win so many campaigns. Therefore, as not to have to rob his subjects, to be able to defend himself, not to become poor and contemptible, nor to be forced to become rapacious, a prince should esteem it little to incur a name for meanness, because this is one of those vices which enables him to rule. And if someone should say Caesar attained empire with liberality, and many others, because they have been and have been held to be liberal, have attained very great rank, I respond, either you are already a prince, or you are on the path to acquiring it. In the first case, this liberality is damaging. In the second, it is indeed necessary to be held liberal. One. And Caesar was one of those who wanted to attain the Principate of Rome. But after he had arrived there, he had remained alive and not been temperate with his expense, he would have destroyed that empire. And if someone should reply, many have been princes and have done great things with their armies who have been held very liberal, I respond to you, either the prince spends from what it is his own, and his subjects, either the prince spends from what is his own and his subjects, or from what belongs to someone else. In the first case, he should be sparing. In the other, he should not leave out any part of liberality. And for the prince who goes out with his armies, who feeds on booty, pillage and ransom, and manages on what belongs to someone else, this liberality is necessary. Otherwise, he would not be followed by his soldiers. And for what is not yours or your subjects can be a bigger giver, as were Cyrus. One can be a bigger giver. Caesar Alexander, because spending what is someone else's does not take reputation from you, but adds it to you. Only spending your own is what harms you. And there is nothing that consumes itself as much as liberality. While you use it, you lose the capacity to use it, and you become either poor and contemptible, or to escape poverty, rapacious and hateful. Among all the things that a prince should guard against is being contemptible and hated, and liberality leads you to both. So there is more wisdom in maintaining a name for meanness, which begets infamy without hated, than in being under a necessity, because one wants to have a name for liberality to incur a name for rapacity, which begets infamy with hatred. Damn. Damn. So this is why being liberal, so that you may be held liberal. So it's like meanness. His explanation of meanness is like being frugal, I guess, or being cheap. Yeah, this is like a matter of like finances, right? Yeah, it's a matter of finances, which is like it's much better to be mean. Liberality and parsimony. Yeah. Wow. Oh, this we finally got to the chapter when they explain like it's better whether it is better to be loved than feared or the contrary. Ah, they finally got to the chapter on the famous lines from Machiavellian thought. Yeah, of cruelty and mercy, and whether it is better to be loved than feared or the contrary. Descending text to the other qualities cited before, I say that each prince should desire to be held merciful and not cruel. Nonetheless, he should take care not to use this mercy badly. See? Is that to use this. Cesar Borgia was held to be cruel. Nonetheless, his cruelty restored the Romagna, united it, and reduced it to peace and to faith. If one considers this well, one will see that he was much more merciful than the Florentine people, who, so as to escape a name for cruelty, allowed Pistoia to be destroyed. A prince, therefore, so as to keep his subjects united and faithful, should not care about the infamy of cruelty, because with very few examples, he will be more merciful than those for the sake of too much mercy we allow disorders to continue, from which come killings or robberies, for these customarily hurt a whole community. But the executions that come from the prince hurt one particular person, and of all princes, it is impossible for the new prince to escape a name for cruelty, because new states are full of dangers. And Virgil says in the mouth of Dido, "The harshness of things and the newness of the kingdom compel me to contrive such things, and to keep a broad watch over the borders." Nonetheless, he should be slow to believe and to move, nor should he make himself feared. And he should proceed in a temperate mode with prudence and humanity, so that too much confidence does not make him incautious, and too much diffidence does not render him intolerable. Ha! Ha! From this, a dispute arises whether it is better to be loved than to be feared, or the reverse. The response is one would want to be both the one and the other. See, that is what he said. Why did... But because it is difficult to put them together, it is much safer to be feared than loved, and one has to lack one of the two. If one if one has to lack one of the two. For one can say this generally of men, that they are ungrateful, fickle, pretenders, dissemblers, evaders of danger, eager for gain. While you do them good, they are yours, offering you their blood, property, lives, and children, as I said above. When they need them, when the need for them is far away, but when it is close to you, they revolt. That prince who has founded himself entirely on their words, stripped of their preparations, is ruined. For friendships that are acquired at a price, and not with greatness and nobility of spirit, are bought. But they are not owned, and when the time comes, they cannot be spent. And men have less hesitation to offend one who makes himself loved than one who makes himself feared. For love is held by a chain of obligation, which, because men are wicked, is broken at every opportunity for their own utility, but fear is held by a dread of punishment that never forsakes you. It didn't put a lot of thought in this. You're just not willingly, like, just nonchalantly or casually saying these things that these are like, it really did put a lot of thought in it, and I truly explained why it's much better to be feared than to be loved. It's just like, yeah, people quote this shit and they like so easily say things but never actually read the entire text. And now that I'm reading it, I'm like, I kinda understand it. I kinda do. Kinda in a way. But fear is held by dread, yes. The prince should not nonetheless make himself feared in such a mode that if he does not acquire love, he escapes hatred. See? He said this! Because being feared and not being hated can go together very well. This he will always do if he abstains from the property of his citizens and his subjects, and from their women, and if he also needs to proceed against someone's life. He must do it, and when there is sustainable justification and manifest cause for it. See? Yeah, it's just, yeah. Can you just explain that shit? You just explained it clearly, man. It's just right there. But above all, he must abstain from the property of others, because men forget the death of a father more quickly than the loss of a patrimony. Wait, did I understood patrimony right? Oh, yeah. Yep, exactly. Yep. Furthermore, causes for taking away property are never lacking, and he who begins to live by rapine. What is rapine? Violence, seizure of someone's property. And he who begins to live by rapine always finds cause to seize others' property. And on the contrary, causes for taking life are rarer and disappear more quickly. Causes for taking life are rare and disappear more quickly. What does it mean, man? Furthermore, causes for taking away property are never lacking. And he who begins to live by rapine always finds cause to seize others' property. And on the contrary, causes for taking life are rarer and disappear more quickly. But when the prince is with his armies and has multitude of soldiers under his government, then it is above all necessary not to care about a name for cruelty. Because without this name, he never holds his army united, or disposed to any action. Among the admirable actions of Hannibal is numbered this one, that when he had a very large army, mixed with infinite kinds of men, and had led it to fight in alien lands, no dissension ever arose in it, neither among themselves nor against the prince, in bad as well as in good fortune. This could have not arisen from anything other than his inhuman cruelty, which together with his infinite virtues always made him venerable and terrible in the sight of his soldiers, and without it his other virtues would not have sufficed to bring about this effect. And the writers, having considered little in this, on the one hand admired this action of his, but on the other condemned the principal cause of it. And to see that it is true that these other virtues would not have been enough, one can consider Scipio, who was very rare not only in his times but also in his entire memory of things known whose armies in Spain rebelled against him. Those arose from nothing but his excessive mercy, which had allowed his soldiers more license than is fitting for military discipline. Scipio's mercy was reproved in the Senate by Fabius Maximus, who called him the corrupter of the Roman military. After the Locrians had been destroyed by a legate of Scipio's, they were not avenged by him, nor was the insolence of that legate corrected, all of which arose from his agreeable nature, and that when someone in the Senate wanted to excuse him, he said that there were many men who knew better not to err than how to correct errors. Such a nature would in time have been sullied. Scipio's fame and glory, if he had continued with it in the empire, but while he lived under the government of the Senate, this damaging quality of his not only was hidden, but made for his glory. I conclude then, returning to being feared and loved, that since men love at their convenience and fear at the convenience of the prince, a wise prince should found himself on what is his, and not on what is someone else's. He should only contrive to avoid hatred, as was said. Sheesh! Like, what the fuck am I reading at this? Yeah, she's getting more and more serious, eh? Oh, this is good. Probably less. We're halfway there now, anyways. We're like 100. Yeah, and that's like around 100. That's probably yeah. In what mode faith should be kept by princes? How praiseworthy it is for a prince to keep his faith and to live with honesty and not by astuteness. Everyone understands. Nonetheless, one sees by experience in our times that the princes who have done great things are those who have taken little account of faith and have known how to get around men's brains with their astuteness. And in the end, they have overcome those who have founded themselves on loyalty. Thus, you must know that there are two kinds of combat, one with laws and the other with force. The first is proper to man, the second to beasts. But because the first is often not enough, one must have recourse to the second. Therefore, it is necessary for a prince to know well how to use the beast and the man. The role was taught covertly to princes by ancient writers, who wrote that Achilles and many other ancient princes were given to Chiron the centaur to be raised, so that he would look after them with his discipline. To have as a teacher a half beast, half man means nothing other than a prince needs to know how to use both natures, and the one without the other is not lasting. Thus, since a prince is compelled of necessity to know well how to use the beast, he should pick the fox and the lion, because the lion does not defend itself from the snares and the fox does not defend itself from the wolves. So one needs to be a fox to recognize the snares and a lion to frighten the wolves. Those who stay simply in the lion with the lion do not understand this. A prudent lord therefore cannot observe faith, nor should he. When such observance turns against him, the causes that made him promise have been eliminated. And if all men were good, this teaching would not be good. But because they were wicked and do not observe faith with you, you also do not have to observe it with them. Nor does a prince ever lack legitimate causes to color his failure to observe faith. One could give infinite modern examples of this, and show how many peace treaties and promises have been rendered invalid and vain through the infidelity of princes. And the one who has known best how to use the fox has come out best. But it is necessary to know well how to color this nature, and to be a great pretender and dissembler. And men are so simple as so obedient to present necessities that he who deceives will always find someone who will let himself be deceived. I do not want to be silent about one of the recent examples. Alexander VI never did anything, nor ever thought of anything, but how to deceive men, and he always found a subject whom he could do it. To whom he could do it. And he always found a subject to whom he could do it. And there never was a man with greater efficacy in asserting a thing and in affirming it with greater oaths who observed it less. Nonetheless, his deceit succeeded at this will, because he well knew this aspect of the world. Thus, it is not necessary for a prince to have all the above mentioned qualities in fact, but it is indeed necessary to appear to have them. Nay, I dare say this, that by having them and always observing them, they are harmful, and by appearing to have them, they are useful. As it is to appear merciful, faithful, humane, honest, and religious, and to be so, but to remain with the spirit built so that if you need to be those things, you are able to know how to change to the contrary. This has to be understood, that a prince, and especially a new prince, cannot observe all those things for which men are held good, since he is often under a necessity to maintain his state of acting against faith, acting against charity, against charity, against humanity, against religion, and so he needs to have a spirit disposed to change as the winds of fortune and variations of things command him. As I said above, not depart from good when possible, but know how to enter into evil when forced by necessity. A prince should thus take great care that nothing escapes his mouth that is not full of the above mentioned 5 qualities, and that to see him and hear him he should appear all mercy, all faith, all honesty, all humanity, all religion. And nothing is more necessary to appear to have done this last quality. Men in general judge more by their eyes than by their hands, because seeing is given to everyone, touching to few. Everyone sees how you appear, few touch what you are. These few dare not oppose the opinion of many, who have their majesty of the state to defend them. And in the actions of all men, and especially of princes, where there is no court to appeal to, one looks to the end. So let a prince win and maintain his state. The means will always be judged honorable, and will be praised by everyone. For the vulgar are taken in by the apprentice and the outcome of a thing. And in the world there is no one but the vulgar. The few have a place there. When the many have somewhere to lean on, a certain priest of present times, whom it is not well to name, never preaches anything but peace and faith, and is very hostile to both. If he had observed both, he would have either his reputation or his state taken from him many times. Yep. Of avoiding contempt and hatred. But because I have spoken of the most important of the qualities mentioned above, I want to discourse on the others briefly under this generality, that the prince as was said above in part, should think how to avoid those things that make him hateful and contemptible. When he avoids them, he will have done his part and will find no danger in his other infamies. What makes him hated above all, as I said, is to be rapacious. And a usurper of the property and the women of his subjects. From this he must abstain, and whenever he does not take away either property or honor from the generality of men, they live content, and one has only to combat the ambition of few, which may be checked in many modes and with ease. What makes him contemptible is to be held variable, light, effeminate, pusillanimous, irresolute, from which a prince should guard himself as from a shoal. He should contrive that greatness, spiritedness, gravity, and strength and recognize in his actions. And he should insist that his judgments in the private concerns of his subjects be irrevocable. And he should maintain such an opinion of himself that no one thinks either of deceiving him or getting around him. The prince who gives this opinion of himself is highly reputed, and against whoever is reputed it is difficult to conspire, difficult to mount an attack, provided it is understood that he is excellent and revered by his own subjects. For a prince should have two fears, one within, on account of his subjects, the other outside, on account of external powers. From the latter, one is defended with good arms and good friends, and if one has good arms, one will always have good friends. And things inside will always remain steady. If things outside are steady, unless indeed they are distributed by a conspiracy, and even if things outside are in motion, provided he has ordered and lived as I said, as long as he does not forsake himself, he will always withstand every thrust, as I said Nabis the Spartan did. But as to subjects, when things outside are not moving, one has to fear that they may be conspiring secretly. From this, the prince may secure himself sufficiently if he avoids being hated or despised, and keeps the people satisfied with him. This is necessary to achieve, as was said above, the land. And one of the most powerful remedies that the prince has against conspiracies is not to be hated by the people generally. For whoever conspires always believes that he will satisfy the people with the death of the prince, but when he believes he will offend them, he does not get up the spirit to adopt such a course, because the difficulties on the side of the conspirators are infinite. And one sees from experience that there have been many conspiracies, but few have had a good end. For whoever conspires cannot be alone, but he cannot find company except from those he believes to be malcontents. And as soon as you disclose your intent to be malcontent, you give him the matter which to become content, because manifestly he can hope for every advantage from it. So, seeing sure gain on this side and on the other dubious gain full of danger, he must indeed either be a rare friend or an altogether obstinate enemy of the prince, to observe his fate with you. And to reduce this to brief terms, I say that on part of the conspirator there is nothing but fear, jealousy, and the anticipation of terrifying punishment. But on the part of the prince there is the majesty of the principality, the laws, the protection of friends, and of the state which defends him. So that when popular goodwill is added to all these things, it is impossible that anyone should be so rash as to conspire. For whereas a conspirator ordinarily has to fear before the execution of the evil, in this case, he must fear afterwards too, when the excess has occurred, nor can he hope for any refuge. One might give infinite examples of this matter, but I wish to be content with only one that happened within the memory of our fathers. Messer Annibale Bentivoglio, grandfather of the present Messer Annibale, who was Prince of Bologna, was killed by the Canesci conspiring against him, and no one survived him but Messer Giovanni, who was in swaddling clothes, Immediately after that homicide, the people rose up and killed all the Canesci. This came from the popular goodwill of the house of Bentivoglio had in those times, which was so great that since there remained no one in that house in Bologna who could rule the state, Annibale being dead, and since there was indication that in Florence someone had been born of the Bentivogli, who was considered until the son of a blacksmith, the Bolognese came to Florence for him and gave him the government of this city. What? Which was governed by him until Messer Giovanni reached an age suitable for governing. I conclude therefore that a prince should take a little account of conspiracies and the people show goodwill to him. But if they are hostile and bear hatred for him, he should fear everything and everyone. See, being feared and being hated is two different things. Ha! And well-ordered states and wise princes have thought out with all diligence how not to make the great desperate, and how to satisfy the people and keep them content. Because this is one of the most important matters that concern the prince. Among the well-ordered and governed kingdoms in our times is that of France, and in it are infinite good institutions on which the liberty and security of the king depend. The first of these is the parliament and its authority. For the one who ordered that kingdom, knowing the ambition of the powerful and the insolence, and judging it necessarily for them to have a bit of their mouths to correct them, and on the other side, knowing the hatred of the generality of the people against the great which is founded on his fear, wanting to secure them, intended this not be the particular concern of the king, so as to take from him the blame he would have from the great when he favored the popular side, and when the popular side when he favored the great. And so he constituted a third judge to be the one who would beat down the great and favor the lesser side without blame for the king. This order could not be better or more prudent or a greater cause of the security of the king and the kingdom. From this one can infer another notable thing, that princes should have anything blamable administered by others, favors by themselves. Again, I conclude that a prince should esteem the great, but not make himself hated by the people. It might perhaps appear to many, considering the life and death of some Roman emperor, that there were examples contrary to my opinion, since one may find someone who has always lived excellently and shown great virtue of spirit, and has nonetheless lost the empire or indeed been killed by his own subjects who conspired against him. Since I want therefore to respond to these objections, I shall discuss the qualities of certain emperors, showing the causes of their ruin to be not unlike that which I have advanced, and in part I shall offer for the consideration things that are notable for whoever reads about the actions of these times. And I want it to suffice for me to take all the emperors who succeeded to the empire, from Marcus the philosopher to Maximinus. These were Marcus Commodus, his son, Pertinax, Julianus, Severus, his son Antonius Caracalla, Macrinius, Heliogabalus, Alexander, and Maximinus. And first, it is to be noted that whereas in other principalities one has to contend only with the ambition of the great and the insolence of the people, the Roman emperors had a third difficulty of having to bear with the cruelty and avarice of their soldiers. This was so difficult that it was the cause of the ruin of many, since it was difficult to satisfy the soldiers and the people. For the people loved quiet and therefore loved modest princes, and the soldiers loved a prince with a military spirit who was insolent, cruel, and rapacious. They wanted him to practice these things on the people so that they could double their pay and give vent to the avarice and cruelty. These things always brought about the ruin of those emperors who by nature or by art did not have a great reputation, such as they could hold both in cheek. And most of them, especially those who came to the Principate as new men, once they recognized the difficulty of these two diverse humors, turned to satisfying the soldiers, caring little about injuring the people. This course was necessary, for since princes cannot fail to be hated by someone, they are at first forced not to be hated by the people generally. And when they cannot continue this, they have to contrive with all industry to avoid the hatred of those communities which are most powerful. And so these emperors those emperors who because they were new had need of extraordinary support stuck to the soldiers rather than the people, which nonetheless turned out useful for them, or not according to whether the prince knew how to keep himself in repute with them. From the causes mentioned above, Marcus, Pertinax, Alexander, all living in a modest life, lovers of justice, enemies of cruelty, humane and kind, all except for Marcus, came to a bad end. Only Marcus lived and died most honorably, because he succeeded to the empire by hereditary right and did not have to acknowledge it as from either the soldiers or the people. Then, since he was attended by many virtues that made him venerable, while he lived, he always kept the one order and the other within its bounds, and was never either hated or despised. But Pertinax was created emperor against the will of the soldiers, who, since they were used to living in license under the Commodus, could not tolerate the decent life to which Pertinax wanted to return them. Hence, having created hatred for himself, and to this hatred added disdain, since he was old, he was ruined in the first beginnings of his administration. And here, one should know that hatred is acquired through good deeds as well as bad ones. And so, as I said above, a prince who wants to maintain his state is often forced not to be good. For when the community of which you judge you have need to maintain yourself is corrupt, whether they are people or the soldiers or the greedy, you must follow their humor to satisfy them, and then good deeds are your enemy. But let us come to Alexander. He was of such goodness that among the other praise attributed to him is this, that in the 14 years he held the empire, no one was ever put to death by him without a trial. Nonetheless, he was held to be effeminate and a man who let himself be governed by his mother, and for this came to be despised. The army conspired against him and killed him. Reviewing now, by contrast, the qualities of Commodus, of Severus, Antonius Caracalla, Maximinus, you will find them very cruel and very rapacious. To satisfy the soldiers, they would not spare any kind of injury that could be inflicted on the people, and all except Severus came to a bad end. For in Severus was so much virtue that by keeping the soldiers his friends, although the people were overburdened by him, he was always able to rule happily, because his virtues made him so admirable in the sight of the soldiers and the people that latter remained somehow astonished and stupefied, while the former were revered and satisfied. And because the actions of this man were great and notable in a new prince, I want to show briefly how well he knew how to use the persons of the fox and the lion, whose natures I saw above, are necessary for a prince to imitate. Since Severus knew of the indolence of the Emperor Julianus, he persuaded his army, of which he was captain of Slavonia, that it would be good to go to Rome and avenge the death of Pertinax, who had been put to death by the Praetorian soldiers. Under this pretext, without showing that he aspired to the empire, he moved his army against Rome, and he was in Italy before his departure was known. When he arrived at Rome, he was elected emperor by the state out of fear, and Julianus put to death. After this beginning, there remained two difficulties for Severus if he wanted to become lord of the whole state. One in Asia, where Pescennius Niger, the head of the Asian armies, had himself called emperor, and the other in the west, where Albinus aspired to the empire. And because he judged it dangerous to disclose himself as an enemy to both, he decided to attack Niger and deceive Albinus. To Albinus he wrote that since he had been elected emperor by the Senate, he wanted to share that dignity with him. He sent him the title of Caesar, and by deciding of the Senate, accepted him as a colleague. These things were accepted by Albinus as true, but after Severus had defeated Niger, put him to death, and brought the peace to affairs in the east, he returned to Rome and complained in the Senate that Albinus, hardly grateful for the benefits he had received from him, had perfidiously sought to kill him. And for this it was necessary for Severus to go punish his ingratitude. That he went to meet him in France and took from him his state and his life. Thus, whoever examines minutely the action of this man will find him a very fierce lion and a very astute fox. Will see that he was feared and revered by everyone, and not hated by the army. I will not marvel that he, a new man, couldn't have held so much power. For his very great reputation always defended him from the hatred that the people could have conceived for him because of his robberies. But his son Antonius was himself a man who had most excellent parts that made him marvelous in the sight of the people and pleasing to the soldiers. For he was a military man, very capable of enduring every trouble, disdainful of all delicate food and all other softness which made him loved by the armies. Nonetheless, his ferocity and cruelty were so great and so unheard of, for after an infinite individual killings he had put to death a great part of the people of Rome and all the people of Alexandria, that he became most hateful to all the world. He began to be feared even by those whom he had around him, so that he was killed by a centurion in the midst of his army, Here it is to be noted that deaths such as this, which follows from the decision of an obstinate spirit, cannot be avoided by princes, because anyone who does not care about death can hurt him. But the prince may well fear them less because they are very rare. He should only guard against doing grave injury to anyone whom he uses and has around him in the service of his principality. As Antonius had done, he had put to death with disgrace a brother of that centurion, and threatened him every day. Yet he kept him in his bodyguard, which was rash policy likely to bring ruin, and happened to him. But let us come to Commodus, who held the empire with great ease because he had it by hereditary right. Being the son of Marcus, it was enough for him only to follow the footsteps of his father. He would have satisfied both the soldiers and the people, but since he had a cruel and bestial spirit, so as to practice his rapacity on the people, he turned to indulging the armies and making them licentious. On the other hand, by not keeping his dignity, by descending often into theaters to fight with gladiators, and by doing other very base things, hardly by deserving of the imperial majesty, he became contemptible in the sight of the soldiers. And since he was hated on one side and despised on the other, he was conspired against and put to death. It remains now to tell of the qualities of Maximus. He was a very warlike animal, and since the armies were disguised with the softness of Alexander, whom I discussed above, when he was put to death, they elected Maximus to the empire. He did not possess it for long because two things made him hated and contemptible. One was being of very base origin, because he had formerly herded sheep in Thrace. The other was because the start of his principality he had deferred going to Rome and taking possession of the imperial throne. He had established an opinion of himself as very cruel, since he had committed many cruelties through his prefects in Rome and everywhere in the empire. So since the whole world was excited by indignation at the baseness of his blood and by hatred arising from fear of his ferocity, Africa rebelled first. Then the Senate with all the people of Rome and all Italy conspired against him. These were joined by his own army, which, while besieging Aquileia and finding difficulty in capturing it, became disgusted with this cruelty, and fearing him less because it saw he had so many enemies, it killed him. I do not want to reason about either Heliogabalus or Macrinus or Julianus, who, because they were altogether contemptible, were immediately eliminated. But I shall come to the conclusion of this discourse, and I say that the princes of our times have less of this difficulty of satisfying the soldiers by extraordinary means in the government, for notwithstanding that one has to show them some consideration. Yet this is quickly settled, because none of these princes has armies joined together which are entrenched in the government and administration of provinces, as were the armies of the Roman Empire. And so, if that time it was necessary to satisfy the soldiers rather than the people, it was because the soldiers could do more than the people. Now it is necessary for all princes except the Turk and the Sultan to satisfy the people rather than the soldiers. Because the people can do more than the soldiers. I accept the Turk from this, since he always keeps around him 12,000 infantry and 15,000 horse, on which whom the security and strength of his kingdom depend. And it is necessary for that lord to put off every other regard and keep them his friends. Similarly, since the kingdom of the Sultan is in the hands of the soldiers, he is also required to keep them his friends. Without respect for the people, and you have to know that the Sultan's state is formed unlike all the other principalities because it is similar to the Christian pontificate, which cannot be called either a hereditary principality or a new principality. For it is not the sons of the old prince who are the heirs and become the lords, but the one who is elected to that rank by those who have the authority for it. And this being an ancient order, one cannot call it a new principality, because some of the difficulties in new principalities are not in it. For if the prince is indeed new, the orders of that state are old and are ordered to receive him as if he were their hereditary lord. But let us return to our matter. I say that whoever considers the discourse written above will see that either hatred or disdain has been the cause of the ruin of the emperors named before, and will also know whence it arises, that though some of them proceeded in one mode and some in the contrary mode, in whichever mode, one of these came to a happy end and the others unhappy ends. For to Pertinax and Alexander, because they were new princes, it was useless and harmful to wish to imitate Marcus, who was in the principate by hereditary right. And similarly, for Caracalla, Commodus, and Maximinus, it was a pernicious thing to imitate Severus, because they do not have as much virtue as would allow them to follow in his footsteps. Therefore, a new prince in a new principality cannot imitate the actions of Marcus, nor again it is necessary to follow those of Severus, but he should take from Severus those parts which are necessary to found his state, and from Marcus those which are fitting and glorious to conserve a state that is already established and firm. Whoa! What a read. Yeah. Teka may... Teka may... Just keep on. Chapter 20. Chapter 20, 97, page 97. Let's go to like 100 and then we're done. This is the last chapter, chapter 20. Then we'll be done and then continue it in a part 2. Probably. I'm feeling quite tired. It's like 3 hours of reading this entire book, which is like quite... No, we might not be able... This is quite hard. Whether fortresses and many other things which are made and done by princes every day are useful or useless. Some princes have disarmed their subjects so as to hold their states securely. Some others have kept their subjects sounds divided. Some have nourished emanates against themselves. Some others have turned to gaining to themselves those who have been suspect to them at the beginning of their states. Some have built fortresses, some have knocked them down and destroyed them, and although one cannot give a definite judgment on all these things unless one comes to particulars of those states where any such decision has to be made, nonetheless, I shall speak in that broad mode which matter permits in itself. Therefore has never been then a new prince who has disarmed his subjects. On the contrary, whether he has found them unarmed, he has always armed them. For when they are armed, those arms become yours. Those whom you suspect become faithful, and those who are faithful remain so. And from subjects they are made into your partisans. And because all subjects cannot be armed, and if those who you arm are benefited, one can act with more security towards the others. The difference of treatment that they recognize regarding themselves makes them obligated to you. The others excuse you, judging it necessary that those who have more danger and more obligation deserve more. But when you disarm them, you begin to offend them. You show them that you distrust them either for cowardice or for lack of faith, both of which opinions generate hatred towards you, against you. And because you cannot remain unarmed, and you must turn to a mercenary military, which is of the quality described above. And if it were good, it cannot be so good as to defend you against powerful enemies and suspect subjects. So as I said, a new prince of a new principality has ordered the arms there. The histories are full of examples of this. When a prince acquires a new state that is added as a member to his old one, then it is necessary to disarm that state, except for those who were your partisans in acquiring it. It is necessary to render soft and effeminate in time and with opportunity, and to be ordered so that the arms of all your state are only with your own soldiers who live next to you in your old state. Our ancients and those who were esteemed wise used to say that it was necessary to hold Pistoia with parties and Pisa with fortresses, and because of this they nourished differences in some towns subject to them, so as to hold them more easily. In times when Italy was in balance in a certain mode, it would have been good to do, but I do not believe that one could give it today as a teaching. For I do not believe that the divisions ever do any good. On the contrary, when the enemy approaches, of necessity, divided cities are immediately lost, because the weaker party always joins the external forces and the other will not be able to rule. The Venetians moved, as I believe in the reasons written above, nourished by the Gulf and Ghibelline sects in the cities subject to them. Although the Venetians never let them come to the blood, but still they nourished these contentions among them. So that occupied as those citizens were with their differences, they did not unite against the Venetians. As may be seen, this did not turn out according to their plan either, because when they were defeated by Vaila, one party immediately became daring and took all of their state from them. Such modes therefore imply weakness in the prince, for in a vigorous principality such divisions are never permitted, because they bring profit only in time of peace, as subjects can be managed more easily through them, but when war comes, such an order shows its own fallaciousness. Without doubt, princes become great when they overcome difficulties made for them and opposition made to them. So fortune, especially when she wants to make a new prince great, since he has a great necessity to acquire reputation than a hereditary prince, makes enemies arise for him, and makes them undertake enterprises against him, so that he has cause to overcome them and to climb higher on the ladder that his enemies have brought for him. Therefore many judge that a wise prince, when he has the opportunity for it, should astutely nourish some enmity, so that when he has crushed it, his greatness emerges the more from it. Princes, and especially those that are new, have found more faith and more utility in those men who at the beginning of their states were held to suspect than in those whom they have trusted at the beginning. Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, ruled his state more with those who had been suspect of him than with others. But one cannot speak broadly of this thing because it varies according to the subject. I will only say this: the prince will always be able to win over to himself with the greatest ease those men who in the beginning of the principality had been enemies, and who are such quality that to maintain themselves they need somewhere to lean. They are all more forced to serve him faithfully, as they know it more necessarily for them to cancel out with deeds the sinister opinions one has taken from them. And so the prince always extracts more use from them than from those who, while serving him with too much security, neglect his affairs. And since the matter requires it, I do not want to leave out a reminder to princes who have newly taken a state through internal support within it, that they consider well what cause moved those who supported them to support them. If it is not natural affection toward them, but only because those supporters were not content with that state, he will be able to keep them with his friends with trouble and great difficulty, because it is impossible for him to make them content. And while Well, the cause of this, with examples drawn from ancient modern things, he will say that it is much easier to gain as friends to himself men who were content with the state beforehand and therefore were his enemies, than those who were not content with it because friends became friends and gave him support in seizing it. It has been the custom of princes, so as to be able to hold their states more securely, to build fortresses that would be a bridle and bit for those who might plan to act against them, and to have a secure refuge from sudden attack. I praise this mode because it has been used since antiquity. Nonetheless, it is our time's Messer Niccolò Vitelli was seen to destroy 2 fortresses in Città di Castello in order to hold that state. When Guidobaldo, Duke of Urbino, returned to his dominion from which Cesar Borgia has expelled him, he razed all the fortresses in that province to their foundations, and he judged that without them and he would with great difficulty lose his state again. When Bentivogli returned to Bologna, they adopted similar measures. Fortresses are thus useful or not according to the times, and if they do well for you in one regard, they hurt you in another. And one may discuss this issue. Thus, the prince who has more fear of the people than of foreigners ought to make fortresses, but the one who has more fear of foreigners than of the people ought to omit them. The castle in Milan built by Francesco Sforza has brought and will bring more war to the Sforza house than any other disorder of that state. Therefore, the best fortress there is not to be hated by the people, because although you have fortresses, if the people hold you in hatred, fortresses do not save you. For to peoples who have taken up arms, foreigners will never be lacking to come to their land. In our times, fortresses have not been seen to bring profit to any prince, unless to the Countess of Forli. When Count Girolamo, her consort, died, for the means of a fortress, she was able to escape a popular uprising, to await help from Milan, and to recover her state. In the times then where such a foreigner could not help the people, but the fortresses were worth little to her when Cesar Borgia attacked her and her hostile people joined with the foreigner. Therefore, than before, it would have been more secure for her to not be hated by the people than to have had fortresses. So, having considered all these things, I shall praise whoever makes fortresses and whoever does not, and I shall blame anyone who, trusting in fortresses, thinks little of being hated by the people. That's it. That's it for the day, man. My throat is like fucked. God, couldn't speak. Like 120, like around 102. Can I like make a bookmark? Look at that. Look at that. We're chapter 21, right? The XX1. Yeah. Chapter 21. We're gonna start chapter 21. Next time I'm gonna read this, but I don't think I'll be able to read this. But hey, I read that I've fumbled so many times, and I'm like, shit. I fumbled so many times, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I gonna talk about now? It was quite interesting to be able to like talk for like 3 hours straight and not be able to lose your freaking voice. I quite understand now. Like it's quite difficult, very hard indeed. Anyways, bye. Thank you guys for coming by. I would like to say goodbye to everyone. Say bow bow. What? Okay, bye now. Bye. And see you do some more Machiavelli readings of the Prince. We read more about the Prince more soon. End this thing. Okay. Bye. Quite a short read indeed.